This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation is still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney. Sweeney focusing on Paramount. He's really hardly said anything to me this morning. Huge entertainment news. We'll get to that this morning. Busy week as well. Of course, the Fed meeting coming up. The Fed decides. We'll do that. Is it Wednesday? I think it's Wednesday. In earnings, Paul, we come right out of the joy of earnings last week into another bout this week.
Another big earnings week here, Tom, for the S&P 500. And that's kind of been the focus here. People have been really kind of saying, all right, this Fed seems to be higher for longer. Okay, the market's discounting that. We had a 4 to 5% pullback maybe on some of that news. Now the focus has really been on earnings.
First thing I did this morning, I looked at the NASDAQ 100, and Paul mentions 4, 5, 6% pullback. We're depth.
Yes.
3% drawdown right now.
There we go. So was that it? I don't know. But again, we're just some decent earnings coming out. We'll have more coming up here. I can't wait to, towards the end of the earnings season is when you get a lot of the retailers and they give you a good view on the consumer.
Yeah, and we'll get to the end in a moment. But Apple here, I think it's tomorrow's the festivities. Mark Gurman out publishing Power on this weekend. Paul, Apple 169 showing 172.
Yeah, I mean, here's a name. I mean,
it's like it's got up.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's it's up in a pre-market. Boy, it's down 12% year to date. So it's really no longer part of that Magnificent Seven here. So they've got some headwinds, notably China.
One of our interns just said Apple's Thursday. I was correct.
Okay.
So first surveillance. We're deep into the program, a minute and 30 seconds, and I've already got my first surveillance correction. We welcome all of you on Apple CarPlay, Android Play, out at Google Play, out at Apple as well. The Bloomberg Business app. It's free on YouTube. Bloomberg Podcast. You go into YouTube, you search Bloomberg Podcast. There's a chicklet there, and I am pleased to announce, and I'll have the details for you in 15 minutes. We now have the complete program available to you after we do the program.
Nice.
Paul Sweeney goes on with Alex Steele to Great and Good Things. I take the surveillance nap, and you can still hear the program. And we'll have that for you as well. It is the Interactive Broker Studios up from AAA for Lisa Mateo with our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
I think it's just for today. Well, maybe tomorrow. Stock futures pointing to a higher open right now. Busy start on the street. The Fed holding the two-day meeting. Over 180 more companies reporting earnings this week. They include two members of the so-called Magnificent Seven. Of course, as you just heard, Microsoft and Google parent Alphabet. And Elon Musk making an unannounced trip to China yesterday. The surprise visit appears to have paid immediate dividends. Tesla clearing two key hurdles to introduce its driver assistance system to the world's biggest auto market. Shares of Tesla in the pre-market most active. They're up about 8.5%. They call it pizza. Domino's Pizza reporting earnings this morning. First quarter EPS coming in at $3.58 a share. That was a solid beat. Let me do a quote on the yen. That's actually weaker right now. Stronger right now, I should say. Up 1.6%, 155.88. And as far as futures right now, the Dow futures up 35. S&P E-mini futures 8 points higher. The NASDAQ futures up 47 points. We check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio. In for Lisa, I'm John.
Tucker topping Lisa there with the yen.
Calling out the yen.
Well, it's also a holiday there, so
thin trading.
Thin trading.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exaggerated trading.
John Tucker, thank you so much. We start strong. We've got a great lineup of guests in this hour. Stephen Major of HSBC with us here in 12 minutes. And right now, as we look at equities into bonds, is Mike Green, to say the least, qualified, Simplify Asset Management. He's out with Ritholtz this weekend.
I heard that.
His people, they
Masters
got together,
and
they're doing masters in business. Mike Green, thank you for starting us strong this week. Mike, you talk on the accounting basis about inventories. I think it's the number one thing we ignore in economics. Explain to us why inventories matter to Jerome Powell right now.
Well, the key component of the disappointing GDP report was actually a disappointing build or drawdown in inventories. It suggests that a lot of the confidence that was expressed or the need to rebuild inventory that showed up in the really strong GDP report last year in September and really in December has started to fade away. And there is clearly some questions around this. I heard you mentioning Apple's report and Apple being guided higher. We're seeing very clear indications that China is trying to re-stimulate itself once again. Clearly the news coming out of China for Tesla is now pushing Apple higher, for example. So it's all the same underlying component. Everybody is seeing the slowdown. Everybody is trying to stimulate. And the question is, do we look through it or do we think that there's something else?
All right, so if we're seeing the slowdown there, Mike, what do you think the Fed should do in the next couple of meetings versus maybe what they are likely to do?
Well, I think the really key dynamic is that we've seen a strongly bifurcated economy. The older generation and those who have cash on hand are suddenly generating fantastic returns off that cash versus their expectations 2 years ago, while those who had borrowed money or are looking to borrow money for things like buying a house, et cetera, are really struggling under the current levels of interest rates. We're seeing this both at the corporate sector, we're seeing it at the household sector, and candidly, we're seeing a lot of that stress in places like emerging markets, where competition is emerging not just because of the tighter dollar for them, but also because of places like Japan allowing their currency to depreciate and regaining competitiveness.
So, Mike, one of the issues out there for a lot of folks is inflation. Yes, the headline rates are coming down, but boy, I think if you ask the person on the street, they're saying, boy, this inflation is issue number one. How do you view inflation out there in the economy, and how do you think the Fed views it?
Well, this is one of the really, really hard things that's going on right now. Is that if you look at the headline numbers, and in particular, if you look at the headline numbers that ignore what are called the imputed costs, right? Those would be things like the owner's equivalent rent, which is an imputed cost of owning your home, or insurance costs in many cases are imputed to measure how much value you're getting from the insurance component, et cetera, et cetera. Often these things are referred to as including things like hedonic adjustments. It's very frustrating for people to hear that inflation has retreated into the 2.5% to 3% range. The Fed headline PCE index was 2.5%. Now it's rebounded slightly, primarily on oil prices. The core component is down below 3%. It's been relatively stable there. That feels very frustrating to people who are looking at their aggregate change in price level of 25% over the past couple of years. It feels insane to say inflation is 3%, but that is what we're seeing right now. And unfortunately, policy has to be said about what's going forward. And so if I'm thinking about the level of real interest rates in the United States today, they're extraordinarily high versus history.
Right. Well, okay, they're high. Let's discuss that. What's it take to get the real rate down? And where we are now, does it impinge business?
Well, I think we're seeing clearly, again, the same bifurcation. Nobody really stops and says, what is the real interest rate when they buy ice cream at the grocery store? But they do stop and think about it when they start thinking about, do I buy a house? Do I buy a car? Do I buy a large durable goods purchase? All of which are showing very depressed levels in terms of activity. Ultimately, that will flow through into job loss if we continue on this path. And I think this is the really interesting Scylla and Charybdis that the Fed has to navigate.
We got to sell forward to Barry Ritholtz, a master of business. Mike Green on passive investment. Is it a nightmare waiting to happen?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes. And there's huge debate around this. And it's one of the reasons why I'm excited to go on Masters in Business and talk about this with Barry. David Einhorn famously said, markets are broken at this point. I agree with him. But the question is, what do you actually do about that? And unfortunately, this is really a systemic problem where we have released the Kraken, is kind of the easiest way to put it. We've decided to take away the decision-making process in the market and allow it to increasingly be assumed by machines that assume all the other prices they see are correct. That means that the traditional metrics of value investing or attempts to decipher value are impinged. It also means that the reaction to strong viewpoints or strong changes in data are far more volatile than they would have been historically. And so that's all affecting the structure of the markets. What we choose to do about it, I'll tease people myself and say, tune into Barry Ritholtz.
We're going to keep that for Barry as well. Mike Green, thank you so much. With Simplify Asset Management, of course, with Barry Ritholtz, Master of Business. Look for that extended conversation. It's time now for an extended news from New York. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and John. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today begins his 7th diplomatic mission to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas war began more than 6 months ago. While in Saudi Arabia, the secretary discusses his plan for greater security and peace for the people of Yemen. Meanwhile, protests continue across college campuses as students and others are sparring over Israel's military offensive in Gaza and its mounting death toll. Many campuses were largely quiet over the weekend, although a few colleges saw forced removals and arrests. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby weighing in on the rising college campus protests that concern the Israel-Hamas war.
We absolutely condemn the anti-Semitism language that we've heard of late, and we certainly condemn all the hate speech and the threats of violence out there. These protests, we understand they're important, but they do need to be peaceful.
Kirby spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Thousands of former Twitter employees say they're still owed severance pay. Today, the first depositions get underway, starting with ex-owner Elon Musk. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview.
This will be the first arbitration hearings involving those employees who say they were cheated out of severance when Elon Musk bought Twitter in October of 2022. An email from the law firm representing almost 2,000 former Twitter employees, plus more than a dozen class action lawsuits, says the deposition will be in person and last for 7 hours. The company, formerly known as Twitter, which Musk has since renamed X, has been accused in multiple suits of numerous labor and workplace violations. A spokesman for X has declined to comment. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Pedro Sanchez says that he will continue as Spanish prime minister. It was just last week the 52-year-old premier said he would withdraw from the public eye to consider his future after a judge opened a case alleging influence peddling against his wife. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
We got to celebrate. To me, it's an out-of-body experience. I mean, the Mets have come back above 500 ball.
Crazy.
Terrible start.
0-5, yep.
Yankees first place, the dreaded Yankees. And what we're seeing, I mean, New York City is back with sports. And am I right? It's been like 10 or 11 years.
I'm just wondering who will beat the Rangers because they looked magnificent. I mean, they got the broom and the Capitals are like, oh, man, what is happening?
If the Knicks win, who do they play? Do we know yet? We don't know yet.
Indiana. Well, either Indiana or who's playing? Indiana.
They play like Eastern team. They don't play
TBD,
the Lakers.
I think.
Yeah, but Indiana's up 3-1. So
but this, to me, it's like an out-of-body experience. It's April, May.
Yeah.
And the local teams are in the game.
And people in New York are buzzing, you can't help but. I mean, they look magnificent. I mean, it's like all the teams in play. Look out.
And Paul, the ratings, the TV people must love this. I mean, they naturally get a bigger audience. Right?
Yeah, and I think the TV networks like to see everything go 7 games, so they don't want to see too many sweeps here. But that's one of the reasons why Joel Embiid gets all these calls to try to.
Did you talk to Sherry this weekend?
To whom?
Did Sherry this weekend?
Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot going on there. Yeah. I'd love to talk to Mara Gabelli. Good morning. If you're listening, please call in.
Exactly.
Dial 1-800-SURVEILLANCE. And I guess up 6%. I mean, the stock is up. It's a lift with some headlines last night. We're looking for headlines from Paramount. Lucas Shaw at Hollywood driving that conversation. Futures up 8. It's Bloomberg surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Yet strong earnings from Microsoft and Alphabet toward the end of last week that helped stocks to their best weekly gain this year. Now, with earnings season in full swing, futures this morning indicate a slightly higher open. The next two members of the so-called Magnificent Seven to report this week, Apple and Amazon.com. And your earnings scorecard, 230 companies in the S&P 500 have opened their books so far this reporting season, 81% delivering positive earnings surprises. Paramount Global shares, they are up about 5% in pre-market trading. And this comes as the Redstone family, Skydance Media CEO David Ellison have both offered concessions, again up right now 5.2%. Dow futures 45 points higher. The S&P E-mini futures, they're up 8. The NASDAQ futures right now, they're up 40 points. 2-year yield 1 basis point lower. Yeah, that's at 497. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Well, John Tucker, thank you so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, getting your week started here. Fed meeting coming up on Wednesday. Lots else going on. Apple on Thursday as well. Joining us now, as you just talked equities, we talked bonds now and yield. Stephen Major joins us, Global Head of Fixed Income Research at HSBC. Mr. Major appears with us because we will not discuss West Ham season. I mean, it's the only reason he would come on. Steve Major, you've been the bastion, Steve Major, of saying, yeah, yields are going to go higher, but then they're going to work their way back down. Is that trend in place yet, where yields are going to come down from the recent highs, and particularly the real yield recent high?
Yeah, I think we're seeing maybe the third or fourth peak in yields in the last couple of years. I mean, I've just written about this. It looks like a triple top. So any investor who bought in the last couple of years has been disappointed unless they were lucky on their timing, really. So I just think back in January this year, people were reluctant to go into fixed income because of the strong rally we had from October through December. But now you've got a chance to go again. So those that missed out the last few months, they got a chance to buy. I would challenge the mainstream narrative that inflation is a problem, because I think the main explanation for the rise in yields is actually down to growth. It's down to things that people didn't forecast, like population increases, fiscal largesse, that kind of thing. So I suspect the setup is quite fragile for growth going forward, and therefore there's potential for yields to fall quite a lot. I mean, if you want to look at it through the prism of what's priced in to the Fed rate outlook, as you know, only a few months ago we were all talking about 6 or 7 cuts. Now it's gone down to 1 or 2. That's just how the market works. The forward rate is not a forecast. It can move a long way away from the center of gravity. So I suspect the probability of rate hikes is much less than the probability of rate cuts. Therefore, there is an asymmetry in the setup. So if you enter 10-year treasuries today, if yields go up 100 basis points, you lose a couple of percent. If they go down 100 basis points, you make out big time. So I think that's what matters. You are now paid to go into fixed income.
So, Stephen, I guess the question for a lot of folks is, how much duration do I take? I mean, we can park somebody in a 2-year treasury and get darn near 5% there. Is that the trade, or do I want to go out a little bit longer?
Well, yeah, 2-year is the safe trade. And I imagine some people, it depends who you are. So I can understand why a retail investor would extend from owning bills to 2s right here. But there's also this idea that you need to take account of the opportunity cost. So the danger with owning 2s is that you're going to regret it in 2 years' time when they mature. What you need is 10s or longer. So I've been recommending people go into the belly. I think duration is a much underrated concept here. Obviously, I'm wrong if equities keep going up every week, and I'm wrong if the Fed hikes again. But I'm just thinking about the balance of risks over the rest of the year. And I reckon yields go down.
Stephen, you're in Hong Kong, and you've got a real perception about the Pacific Rim. I'm going to start with a generalization that China's buying gold. Are they buying less of our bills, notes, and bonds?
Well, it's publicly available information. You can see the numbers for March that have just been released. So they have been reducing their holdings of dollar product. So that they might have less treasuries, but they might have more of something else. I think it's again publicly available information that the gold holdings have gone up in the private and public sector. What's interesting, though, is the entirety of the data. When you look at who owns the treasuries, about 30% are held overseas. And that number isn't going down. So for every foreign investor that's been reducing their holdings, there's someone else who's picking some bonds up. That has to be the case. So look at the European investors, for example. What Japan's doing is quite interesting because perhaps the official sector could be selling some dollars soon, given the FX moves. But I think net, the overseas holdings are fairly steady, Tom.
Stephen, as I think about HSBC, I think complete global view. Where in the fixed income world do you see the best opportunities here? Is it the U.S. or is it other parts of the world?
Well, I like emerging market sovereigns. And so we've been thinking about an interesting comparison between US high yield corporates and high yield emerging market sovereigns. Now, in that group, there'll be Egypt, Turkey, Oman, for example. But you can get dollar-denominated EM sovereigns with a really decent yield right now. So I think they compare quite nicely to corporate high yield. And I think globally, I would look at duration as being quite attractive in Europe as well as the US. In fact, the last three months, we've favored taking more duration exposure in Europe than the US. And that's because we think the ECB and or the Bank of England are going to cut before the Fed. But I think that's becoming a bit of a consensus view. It wasn't at the start of the year,
right?
But it doesn't make it wrong. I think Europe cuts first.
Steve, just a minute left. What's a normal 10-year real yield in the United States? We're at 2 point.
Well, it should reflect, it should reflect the trend GDP over time. So if you can get 2, you're above what the Fed has forecasted as longer run trend GDP. So you should be okay. If you want to compare the real yield to the longer run neutral rate or R star or what have you, I still think you've got enough yield so the market yield is 150 to 200 above the Fed's R star. The market yield is above the trend GDP. So take your pick. There's enough yield there.
Right. Steve Major, thank you so much with HSBC. Wonderful. And again, we protect the copyright of all of our guests. Get his important note, the Major report. Get that through HSBC. Yep. Paul, I don't think this was beautifully explained by Mr. Major. And the idea that, the potential GDP, trend GDP, what is it, 1.8%, 2%? And right now we're at 2.19%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the real yield is higher than trend GDP.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a nice way of looking at it.
It's a nice way to look at it. And he sees some opportunities outside of the U.S. As well. So when you think about HSBC, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Banking Corporation, you just think them outposts in all the major financial capitals around the world. 20 minutes ago, Paramount Global extends pre-market gain to 6.3%. What do they want? The Redstone family, the controlling shareholders, want out. They see the writing on the wall, which is the long-term trends for some of the traditional media companies is really negative. The question is, what did they get paid vis-a-vis other shareholders, non-controlled shareholders? And that is kind of where we are right now.
So you've identified that Disney, the jewel, is the theme parks. What's the jewel of Paramount?
It's the studio, and it's the studio lot, the Paramount studio.
The movie-making studio lot.
Yeah, and the library associated. How much money can you make with Top Gun over time, with The Godfather over time?
Okay, we're watching that. Yeah. Lucas Shaw with an important note, I'll try to get that out on social, futures advance up 11, the VIX 15.24. We get the week started at Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This is Bloomberg Business Flash. Busy week, Fed meeting this week. Betting is we're going to maybe just get one cut this year, and that'll come near the end of the year. But monetary policy kind of taking a backseat to the earnings for now, with Apple and Amazon scheduled to report in the next few days. Investors are going to be hoping for more evidence that big tech profits can keep propelling stocks. And you just mentioned this, Paul. Everybody on intervention watch after sliding past 160. Yen strengthening this morning right now at 155.91. Most active in the pre-market, shares of Tesla jumping close to 10%, trading after clearing hurdles to introduce its driver assistance system to China, the world's biggest driving market. Dow futures right now up 69 points. S&P E-mini futures up 13. NASDAQ futures up 62. The 2-year yield 2 basis points lower. That's at 497. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash, Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. This is a joy, and this is a joy because you say you're going to college in France, and you go to Paris, right? You go to Paris. The smart people go south to, I think it's pronounced Montpellier.
Montpellier, okay.
It's like near Nice, and it's the sun's out. It's like Pepperdine.
Rosé. All I know about that is rosé.
It's the Pepperdine. It's the Pepperdine of France. Joining us now, someone smarter than everybody else that went to Paris. Audrey Child-Freeman joins us with Bloomberg Intelligence in London on foreign exchange. I first read her material at CIBC a few years ago, and thrilled she's on today as we look at the Japanese yen. Audrey, can they succeed at intervention unilaterally, or do they have to go out there and go help and find somebody to help them?
Well, I think that unilateral intervention just, it depends when you deliver it. If you deliver it at a time when the market was turning already, then you have a chance of success. But the problem for the BOJ is that they are delivering at a time when everybody wants to be long dollar. So that's a little bit of a conundrum. And that means that the best case scenario in the near term is that you get some kind of consolidation. I think that's what will happen because many would have been kind of caught out on this intervention if confirmed, but it would most likely be. But then, very quickly, and I think it will be a matter of days before our attention turns back into the Fed. And obviously the Fed meeting and what is the message from the Fed.
Well, this is the important point because George Saravelis of Deutsche Bank, Paul, out with a great note over the weekend. And basically, and Audrey, this is critical, are the institutions of Japan essentially looking to the United States, please help us and adjust your policy and rates lower as to take pressure off us?
Well, that's probably a fair argument, but the problem is that the U.S. has other consideration to take into account at this point. And I think at some point, the next question that people will ask themselves in the market is, at what point is a strong dollar everybody's problem, including the U.S. problem? And I kind of feel that right now it's probably not enough of an issue for the U.S. to join in. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we had the G7 communique that got a lot of attention. But that obviously was signed by the U.S., but the G7 communique didn't say anything new. They reiterated that excess FX volatility is not welcome. And at the moment, actually, with the exception of today, FX volatility has been extremely low. So what is the compelling reason for the U.S. to join in at this point?
Paul, I agree totally with what Audrey Child-Freeman just said. I mean, there's absolutely no incentive to do a 1998 Stan Fisher coordinated intervention. I mean, they're alone on this. Maybe China, but I don't even think they're.
So, Audrey, can you just explain to me, because I don't follow this FX stuff as much as Tom and John Tucker do, what happened in Japan overnight? Was it just the fact that it was a holiday, not as thin trading? But because those are huge moves. I mean, to breach 160, I haven't seen that in a long time.
And come back all the way down to 155.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think what happened is that we had the BOJ meeting on Friday, and the market was kind of, talking about FX intervention potentially threatening and looming, and I've been writing about it. Many of our colleagues have been writing about it. So we kind of felt that it was only a matter of time, given that dollar yen was pushing and pushing. And I kind of felt like, it would have been smart to go on Friday into late US sessions, because, intervening when the volume is thin makes sense, because you have more of an impact into the levels. But today was actually Japanese holiday. So it was just as smart from a purely tactical, let's have as much impact as we can perspective. So, that worked. But the next challenge is whether this can be sustained. And that's a tricky one from a Japanese perspective.
We're going to get different perspectives here, Audrey Child-Friedman. But I use the Bloomberg as you do every day. And I looked at Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, the number of yuan per yen happened to be the ratio I used. And I have a 28% appreciation of the Chinese yuan. So I guess that means Japan tourists are booming. Their exports are cheap. What does Beijing think of dollar yen at 160, or the mass appreciation of the Chinese yuan?
Well, I think that's another matters from a Chinese perspective. The main priority at the moment is, to get the domestic economy back on track, and to get dollar yuan within acceptable levels. And because the other second best carry trade that everybody's got on it is dollar yuan. So I think this one is probably, even this cross dollar yuan is probably just as important as it is from a Japanese yuan perspective.
Audrey, thank you so much. Audrey Child-Friedman from Queen Victoria Street this morning. I think every conversation, Paul, we have to say to those across the country on Apple CarPlay, on YouTube, why? Why does it matter? And the reason it matters, excuse me, I'm fighting the plague, as you can tell. It destabilizes the system.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that.
Yeah, and to see that move, as Audrey was mentioning, on the yen, just kind of overnight, breaking out to 160.17. That's the lowest
thank you. I didn't mention that small detail.
Yeah, the weakest it's been in 34 years, and then it pops right back here. We are at 156.20, and the question for a lot of market participants, particularly the trading desk here in New York, is to what extent, if at any, has the Bank of Japan stepped in here to support their
So I'll explain this slowly just to help you. This is what the adults look at. It's called the trading envelope on the Bloomberg, and it's the number of standard deviations of a move. So when yen was stronger, I think March 1st-ish, and now it's weaker, there's a percentage move. But on a standard deviations, we've gone from negative 3.5 to positive 3.5. which is a 7 standard deviation move to that 160 level early, the American morning. Paul, I think for a major currency, I think I'd have to go to Deutsche Mark, in the 70s. I don't think I've ever seen that. I'll leave that to Barry Eichengreen to tell me. But
yeah, exactly.
This is the new instability within the system.
Yeah, exactly. And so now people are going to, I think, again, you talk to the Audrey Child-Friedmans of the world, the experts here, they're going to see how this thing trades with a fully liquid market here, Asia, Europe, and now the U.S. markets. We're
going to do what we do, which is sprinkle in for you a lot of foreign exchange strategists. Thank you, Jane Foley of Rabobank, who really added a lot of value. I believe it was on Friday or Thursday. A lot of these people are busy. We're efforting. George Saravello is scheduled to be with us from Deutsche Bank. We're efforting Ibrahim Rabari, Jordan Rochester, and others. Kit Jukes publishing overnight. I thought a really sharp note from SocGen, and we'll try to get them all in here.
And you just try to think about is there a bear case for the U.S. dollar? And it just with the Fed presumably going to be keeping rates a little bit higher for longer, maybe relative to the Bank of England, the European central banks, that maybe they're really, at least in the near term, intermediate term, there is not a bear case.
YouTube live chat. Good morning, Mexico City. Good morning, Hamilton, Montana.
Nice.
I didn't even know where that is. Well, they have Grizz.
Yep.
They have Grizz out in Hamilton.
That's where Yellowstone.
Yeah, it's Jellystone.
Yeah, Yellowstone.
Yeah, Norm, good morning out in Hamilton. Montana. I mean, lots going on here. Thank you on the live chat on YouTube. Paul and I are absolutely flabbergasted by the growth of YouTube. You know, it's a fossil. It's making me feel young. I'm like, you know what I did this weekend?
What'd you do?
I watched Dune.
Dune. Wow. Dune 1 or Dune 2?
I watched Dune 1. Dune 2 was extravaganza.
A lot of sand in that.
A lot of sand. It's beautifully shot. I think I can say there's no movie I've ever seen frame for frame.
Really? Oh.
It's spectacularly
Getting a lot of
shot.
Buzz. Yep.
It's got a lot of buzz.
Yeah.
You know, it's very artsy there. But, you know, along with that is YouTube, and it's just booming.
No.
Did you see the revenue? They're modeling $8 billion.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's been such a great pickup acquisition for our good friends at Google. And you think about the digital advertising, it is Google, it is Facebook, it is Amazon. I mean, those three are just dominating the digital advertising space. And the Nathanson people have come out and said just basically, you know, they've been reticent to admit it, but linear TV advertising is officially dead. It's all gone.
Yeah, I noticed this.
They've thrown in the
we'll
towel.
talk about this later. I noticed the pilot program for this autumn, and it's not from our youth, to say the least. It's a new Hollywood. Futures up 13. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul John, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, is urging Hamas to make a decision quickly on Israel's conditions for a temporary ceasefire. He called Israel's proposals extraordinarily generous during a discussion at a special World Economic Forum event in Riyadh. Bloomberg's Laura Davison is in Washington with more.
This is really viewed by all sides as sort of the last moment to get a ceasefire and hostage deal before Israel could go into Rafah, which is where more than 1 million Palestinians have been taking shelter for the past 7 months or so. So this is really viewed as sort of a tense but very important moment.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in Washington. Campus protests around the country over Israel's war in Gaza continue into the last days of the spring semester. Police overnight were seen detaining protesters at Virginia Tech. Meanwhile, UCLA has upgraded security. Tornadoes that ripped through the Great Plains over the weekend have killed at least 5 people. Search and rescue continues in several hard-hit communities. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, after surveying the damage in Sulphur, said it is the most damage that he has seen since he has been governor.
Thank goodness it was a downtown, that there wasn't a lot of people here at 10:30 at night. Doesn't do anything for the one family members that was lost. But it looks, I mean, you just can't believe the destruction. Like, it seems like every business in downtown has been destroyed now.
About 100 others were injured. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, will stand down. Yousaf made the announcement in a speech in Edinburgh. Yousaf's Scottish National Party ended its power-sharing agreement with the Greens last Thursday. The resignation triggers a process for the Scottish Parliament to agree on a new First Minister. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul John.
Thanks so much, Michael Barr. Paul Sweeney, let's frame out the Sweeney statistic. The 2-year yield, everybody's on board. What Paul's looking at, 5% into 4.97%. It's sort of, the last 2 days, quiescent. And I see that in the Bloomberg Financial Conditions Index, which actually became a little more accommodative.
Yeah, it's just a touch here. So we'll keep an eye out. The central bank, the Fed, on May 1st. We'll keep an eye on that. Just some language, I think. It's just people are looking for body language, if nothing else.
In the press conference as well. Michael McKee
we'll send Michael
scheduled
McKee down there.
it,
I think we'll pop him on the Acela train.
He was going to go on to watch Capitals ice hockey, but that didn't work. Hey, that didn't work out. I'm looking at the drawdown here on the Dow. It's 4.1%.
Oh boy.
It's like on the edge. That's a bear market.
Yep. We got the S&P futures
bizarre.
bouncing up a little bit here this morning.
We're watching Microsoft and Google again today. Microsoft with a little bit of lift. Apple with a nice lift. We'll get to that news in a moment. Dan Ives, I believe, scheduled to be with us this morning. Is that correct?
Him. Yep.
Is he going to, what color is he going with? Color wheel?
Clash.
We'll have to see. Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Earnings continue to be in the driver's seat, and in the passenger seat, we're going to say the Fed as they meet this week. Most active in the pre-market right now, shares of Tesla up 10.3%. After we reported the automaker would be partnering with Baidu in the deployment of what it calls full self-driving. In addition to that, the company has passed a key data security and privacy requirement in China, the biggest car market. Ahead of earnings this week, Apple among the most active, climbing 2% after Bernstein upgraded its rating to outperform from market perform. Domino's Pizza reporting revenue for the first quarter. That matched the average analyst estimate. Paramount Global shares up about 4.8% after the Redstone family and Skydance Media CEO both offered concessions to make a possible change in control of the media company a little more appealing to investors. S&P futures right now, they are up 13 points. The Dow futures up 60, and the Nasdaq futures right now 70 points higher. We check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio, I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. Paul Sweeney, I'm looking at the Dune came up, and it's the beautiful Warner Brothers logo that we all know from Bugs Bunny.
Yep.
And it says Warner Brothers Discovery. I'm glad, they have a victory lap. But basically what they're doing, Lucas Shaw has this, they're copying Netflix, and they're going to say, oh, no, passwords.
Yeah.
Does anybody care about the passwords of Max HBO?
They do. Everybody does. And
John,
now,
do you have Max HBO?
That's the one I can't steal from the neighbors, so no, I do not.
Exactly.
He's got 3 wires coming over from his house.
Whatever works.
Yep, whatever works.
I mean, I look, Paul, at this, and it's like it reeks of desperation.
Yeah, but
whole
Netflix,
thing.
but Netflix, it is. You're exactly right. A lot of these media companies are just flailing around trying to figure out a way to make it all work in this new world.
We'll have to see. Lucas Shaw, can't say enough about his newsletter, also mentioning Mark Gurman, very active on Apple, and we will have Dan Ives with us coming up here on a new renaissance for Apple. I'm sure that's what we'll hear from Mr. Ives. Always a bull.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages around the world. Brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. Out on YouTube, use those hearts like you use for Lisa. Give John Tucker some love.
This one comes from the Post, and I am shocked by this story. The Post cites a report by financial tech company Self. It says New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut rank among the top 5 states for residents paying the most in federal and state taxes on their lifetime earnings. Yes, we have the unenviable distinction of being number 1 in the Garden State, leading the bank-breaking pack. Residents shell out a staggering $987,172 on average for various taxes during their lifetime. So that's roughly 54.3% of a resident's total lifetime earnings. And
we get a bang for the buck for that, though, don't we?
Oh, yeah. And this doesn't include my tolls or the advancement of the MTA's June 30th
Eric,
target
this is
date.
Different than when Lisa does it.
I'm just saying.
By
the way,
John's dealing with Dr. Paul here.
West Virginians can sit pretty well. They have to fork over the lowest amount of total taxes nationwide.
But it's affecting migration nationally. You see it, Illinois and some of these other big states.
Well, when you retire, do you stay here and still, fork over gigantic taxes or whatever? Anyway.
Mike said I'm never going to retire, so it works out.
The next one has me crying in my beer. This comes from the Financial Times, citing a study by Deloitte. Britons are choosing to spend less money in bars and pubs than at any time since the lockdown ended. This survey asked about 3,200 UK customers if they had spent more, less, or the same on leisure the past 3 months. It showed sentiment in eating out and drinking in pubs and bars had declined by about 6 percentage points. They didn't talk to anybody I know. Apparently, it's just getting too expensive, though.
Yeah.
For example, they cite Tim Martin. He's the founder of J.D. Wetherspoon, the chain there. He said competition from supermarkets is a pretty big challenge for a lot of the pubs. You buy your beer in the supermarket.
That's original thought.
Well, yeah, it's cheaper, and you just sit home in front of the telly and.
All right, so John, I'm at a beach bar in Belmar yesterday.
right.
Nice sunny day. Going to go get a cold beer out there, sit out on the patio, watch some boats. Miller Lite draft, $14 at the Jersey Shore.
For one draft beer?
Exactly.
What?
Exactly, John.
You buy a case for that.
I know. I said one.
No,
the control room is transfixed by this. They're just,
that's the line.
They got signs up. Bring back Lisa.
Anyway, all right. Let's do the Stones. They kicked off the latest tour last night at Houston's Energy Stadium. That's appropriate. AP describes Mick Jagger often strutting up and down the stage with seemingly boundless energy, while Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood played many familiar guitar riffs beloved by fans. And Jagger led the audience in sing-alongs. Drummer Charlie Watts, he wasn't there. That's because he's dead. Houston was the first stop on the band's 16-city tour. During the 18-song concert set list, the Stones played several tracks off their new record. The Stones have been touring for more than 60 years. And Mick, 80 years old, along with Keith.
Paul, you're the expert on how many times have you seen the Stones?
I've seen them 3, and I wish I would have seen them like 10 more. But
I mean, do they do most of the performing the music, or is it like the backup?
Oh no.
No, I think I mean every
No.
song Keith starts with a world famous riff, you know, and then but yeah, so it's extraordinary. But I can't wait to see what they're charging for tickets and all that kind of stuff. And another thing, Luke, one of the Luke's, the country singer, put in like 90,000 fans at Beaver Stadium at Penn State over the weekend. Country music's huge too.
It is. It is.
So yeah, so
Well,
it's
most appropriately for the Stones, they were sponsored in part by AARP.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
You're serious?
That's serious.
Well, I mean, these guys, they go on tour and they sell out these stadiums. They don't. It's just extraordinary.
I think they had to be in bed by like 8 o'clock. So who knows how long?
When is Lisa back?
And that's your.
Okay, we got 2 minutes here, John, folks.
Stuff.
A command request nationwide from sea to shining sea. This weekend in the New York Post, there was a map of the congestion tax. We go to our surveillance congestion reporter now. John, if you're on the West Side Highway in the 20s or the 40s, you're gonna get you're just gonna go north. It's gonna be packed. The West Side Highway down to the bypass, down by Battery Park. And then up FDR and East Side, it's going to be packed.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. It's going to be like bumper to bumper.
I got to study the maps to figure this
one
out.
There are 14 places they can get John Tucker for a congestion. I counted.
I still don't have an answer. Like when I come in, you get charged. You go to the garage. When you leave, I go through another detector because I have to
get charged a second time? I don't know.
And then I come back down around 66th Street through the park, down to the Lincoln Tunnel, where there are 2 more. I mean, is it every time you go?
I have a consultant on this who suggested to be possibly that would not be the case.
Isn't there a function on the Bloomberg terminal that can do all this for you, John?
Maybe there will be.
There will be.
There will be, is what I would say. You know, I mean,
June 30th, the MTA's target date, but
June 30th.
It's still in court, so who knows?
Well, New Jersey's suing, right?
New Jersey's suing. You have residents in some of the outer boroughs. They're suing. So
it's coming, though.
Right. We should get together and launch a suit at some point. So.
Just to get a boat and paddle across.
You sit at home and you look at your kids and you go, "What was I doing when I was their age?" You know.
Working.
I mean, Sweeney's not normal because all of Sweeney's kids are fully employed, paying taxes, cut their own way. Afterthoughts out there, and she's nuts. I mean, she's going absolutely nuts. And I'm saying, what song was it when I was her age? They came out of nowhere. 3 Dog Night, first hit.
Yeah.
It's a great song. 1. Stay with us. Dan Ives on Apple coming up.
No is the saddest experience you'll ever know. Yes, it's the saddest experience you'll ever know.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Bloomberg Surveillance. We welcome all of you. John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo. Mixed reviews. I mean,
it's a tough comps against
it's difficult. I mean, on YouTube live chat, quote, John Tucker is the best on news because he always gives you so much more.
See?
They never say that about Lisa.
No. It's like those late night commercials. Sort of before
late night commercials. When you get in, one or two.
But there's more.
But there's more. But wait, there's more. Like the Ginsu knife.
Right. That's it. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by the Ginsu knife as well. Good morning, Interactive Brokers. We're in the Interactive Brokers studio. And also thank you to Cone Resnick, who do a lot of work for us as well. We greatly, greatly appreciate their attendance as well. In fact, Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by Cone Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Let Cone Resnick's enterprise risk advisors help you build confidence in your supply chain using data analytics. Visit ConeResnick.com. Thank you, Cone Resnick, for your support as well. On Apple CarPlay, on YouTube, look to Bloomberg Podcast. We're out there, and I can announce that we now have out the full 3-hour show after the fact. We'll give you more details on that as they brief me on it and all that as well. Paul, yen's in the news. Futures up 12. I mean, it's a pretty nice Monday, all in all.
It's a pretty nice Monday. Futures looking a little bit higher here. We're going to hear from the Fed later this week. We're going to get some more earnings, Tom. Amazon and Apple, in case you didn't have enough tech earnings last week, we're going to get some more on the earnings front as well.
It's interesting, and and I apologize, folks. I'm fighting the plague, so I'm a little more gasping than I usually.
Which is great to be locked in a glass enclosed room with him.
It's hermetically sealed.
He coughs on us. We'll all be out this week.
Hermetically sealed with that good news. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, stock futures, they point to higher open for, as you mentioned, Paul, busy start to the Wall Street week. The Fed's holding its two-day meeting, and more than 180 companies will continue reporting earnings this week. They include two more members of the so-called Magnificent Seven, namely Amazon and Apple. The results last week from Microsoft and Google parent Alphabet that lifted stocks to the best weekly gain that we saw all year. Bitcoin, the wider crypto market, that's retreating this morning. And you mentioned the Japanese yen strengthening after weakening past 160 earlier. And let's go down the list of the most active in the pre-market in the S&P 500. Tesla topping the list. That is up right now 11%. Volatile trading, actually. Amazon.com up 1.2%. Apple's up about 1%. You have NVIDIA 0.2% higher. And Paramount Global up 3.5%. Overall, the Dow up 61 points. Dow futures, S&P E-mini futures up 12, and the NASDAQ E-mini futures, they are up 62 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Beautiful day. Yesterday, Paul, would you agree was the first really decent day?
Yeah.
In a very cold spring?
Yeah, exactly. Cold and wet spring, and so we had some nice temps up in the 70s. Today we're pushing above 80 here in New York.
And what you do, you push it to 80, and so the answer is you get out on the golf course. Joining us now, not on Zoom, not work from office.
Nope.
Getting ready for that first tee time at Tamarack, Damian Sassar joins us this morning, and of course, here on the upset. Damian, what does yen weakness mean to EM?
Well, Tom, I mean, it means that the rest of the Asian complex is going to be going down, but I think we're seeing a little bit of a recovery here this morning. I mean, dollar yuan down 2% this year. It's down over 12% since 2021, down in each of the last 2 years, Tom. But look, it looks like the PBOC and some of these central banks like the BOJ are intervening in the markets, and that's helping things here this morning.
It's helping things this morning, but does it apply in intervention? Like when anybody intervenes, they don't like put up a flag saying, hello, we're intervening. It's like a secret, right? Until the market figures it out.
Tom, it is a secret. It's not like anyone's intervening when I'm on the first tee box and my driver's left me after my third round at Tamarack. I mean, it gets pretty dismal out there under the sun. But no, look, I mean, in all seriousness, let's just take a step back. Since October 7th, we know what happened on October 7th of 2023. Equities are up 18%. Spreads have tightened across the board. The dollar is actually weaker despite the strength we've seen, and oil prices are flat, Tom. So despite all this rigmarole around where markets are and where they're going, things appear to be pretty much in line with what we've seen over the better part of the last 6 months.
How does China play into the yen dynamics? Is China, it's a frontier economy, it's an EM economy, et cetera, but how do they play into the thinking at BOJ and MOF?
Well, it's going to be, it's all about substitutes, right? It's all about substitutes of exports, Tom. So it's not just Japan and China, it's Korea, the Philippines, and Indonesia. And if you look at the Bank of Indonesia just last Thursday, Tom, and I was watching very closely from Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, they hiked rates in the face of what a lot of people were doing out there. And so these are serious stuff. You have central banks, and not just emerging market central banks, G10 central banks like Canada and Sweden. I mean, these economies, these central banks are going to cut in the not too distant future, Tom. Their economies are suffering. And so, this is diverging from the Fed. And this is real business. This is real stuff. And if you're out there trading these markets and you're trying to monetize all that carry on offer, this is what you're looking for. So, yeah, it's kind of, so long as vol stays low, steady sailing.
All right. So in the EM space, you mentioned how EM credit spreads remain very tight. Where do I go here? Where are the opportunities here if the U.S. Fed is not going to be cutting anytime soon?
Such a great question, Paul. The big kind of, divergences we're seeing within credit, within EM credit specifically, is that corporate debt is recovered. It's doing phenomenal on the year. Pemex is up on the year, despite the fact that EM sovereign credit is off, I don't know, something on the amount of, 50 basis points year to date. But, it's been high yield. It's been those countries you love, Paul. It's been Ecuador, Argentina, Pakistan, Bolivia, Egypt, Zambia. These are the countries that are leading EMB, which is the largest emerging market, ETF, which is what's in your retail account. This is what's leading that ETF higher, So it's all these sort of high yield economies operating out along the frontier that are driving performance year to date.
So when I see something like Japan happen overnight, it just gets me thinking about international markets. Not that Japan's an emerging market, but how about just Asia in general? Does that kind of suggest to EM investors that there might be more risk in that part of the world?
See, it's a little counterintuitive. Look, I would think the same way, but the problem is a lot of those Asian economies are investment grade, right?
Yep.
And investment grade emerging markets tend to follow the investment grade U.S. corporate credit market. So, spreads have widened there, and that's leaning into the, the Malaysias, the Philippines of the world, the Indonesias of the world. But again, what are we talking about? Off 4 to 5%, full percentage points year to date after, last year's kind of recovery, with spreads still, they backed up a bit here, but, we're still in a pretty decent place. I think you just got to still keep an eye on the dollar. I think, you guys hit it right at the beginning of our conversation. It's about the BOJ. It's about central banks diverging. And what does that mean for their currencies denominated in U.S. dollar terms? Right. And the verdict is still out.
And now, folks, the important SASAR report, as we often do at Bloomberg Surveillance. Damien, you had a 40th birthday golf tour down in the Dominican Republic.
Only it was 40, Tom.
Coming around the corner here. Is Cocotel what you're recommending, or are you all the way down at Punta Espada?
Yeah, no, we were in Casa de Campo. We flew into Santo Domingo. We didn't fly into Punta Cana. I heard that was nice. We had some friends that met us out there. It was 20 gentlemen, a gentleman's trip, 4 rounds in 3 days. Tom, I'm really happy my friend Matt Kolakowski at JP Morgan decided to leave his long irons at home. They were in his bag, Tom, but he didn't bring them to Teeth of the Dog, and that allowed me to make a bit of money. So it's beers on me when I'm back in the office.
Do you like the greens down there, or are you more Tamarack green, Greenwich Connecticut?
You're going to have to come to Tamarack. We did a lot of work. We're going to have to roll those greens together, Tom, because I've heard they are running like an 11-12. So, we're going to have to go out together. We're going to get the flat stick out. Paul can watch us. I know how Paul,
Well, what's great about that is I usually shoot 11 or 12 each hole. Thank you so much. Damien Sassar, thank you for the update. Coming to us from a driving range northeast of Greenwich, Connecticut. Futures advance up 14, Dow futures up 57. Nice character to the tape this morning. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Small towns in Oklahoma are beginning a long cleanup after tornadoes flattened homes and buildings and killed at least 5 people, including an infant. The damage was extensive in the community of Sulphur, where a weekend tornado crumpled many downtown buildings and sheared the roofs off houses across a 15-block radius. Hospitals across the state reported about 100 injuries. This man lives in nearby Holdenville.
My brother lives down there another mile. I was trying to get to him. I think it blowed his tractor shed away, and the house just down from there.
White House officials said President Joe Biden spoke to Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt on Sunday and offered the full support of the federal government. A tornado swept over Trinity, Texas last night, destroying homes and damaging others, injuring 2 people who were transported by ambulance to the hospital. Trinity County Sheriff Woody Wallace.
You got to worry about when these high winds come through, all these power lines. We got power lines down everywhere out here. Some of them are reliable, some of them aren't. You go through them and there's water on the ground. It's probably not going to end well for you.
Sheriff Wallace says there is the possibility for more tornadoes. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is urging Hamas to make a decision quickly on Israel's conditions for a temporary ceasefire. Blinken is on his 7th trip to the Middle East for what may be a last-ditch effort to persuade Israel not to attack the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Bloomberg's Laura Davison has more from Washington.
There's a lot of concern in the international community that if Israel were to go into Rafah, that it would be very bloody, even more loss of life and as more displaced people as well. Israel says that this is something that they are thinking about doing and need to do to eradicate additional Hamas leaders. But there's a lot of opposition elsewhere, including from the U.S.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in the nation's capital. Gaza-related protests continue on college campuses in the U.S., in spite of repeated efforts to shut them down. In Los Angeles yesterday, Palestinian supporters clashed with pro-Israel activists at UCLA. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Owen Brower, University of Puget Sound, applying analytics to the NFL draft. Athletic performance measures as a predictor of future success. So I'm watching like round 6 or round 7. Do those guys have any chance of making the team?
Sure. Now, you might be on the practice squad for a season, but still, you got a chance.
You got a chance.
Yeah.
It's a great paper. He's got a whole literature review. Where you guys sit where you're like into this, or I mean, Rich loses in our control room. Rich loses thousands of dollars he doesn't tell his wife about every year on rotisserie betting.
Glad we kept it down low.
Yeah, we kept it down. Good morning, Mrs. Truman. but the Lady Truman, excuse me. But the bottom line is, does it matter, Paul? Is it just entertainment?
Oh, it definitely matters. I mean, but it's certainly nobody does the draft better than the NFL. I mean, getting big audiences for over a week period. You don't have that in Major League Baseball. You don't have that in hockey. Just because it's a different way. It's a different way the players come up. The NBA does a pretty good job at it as well. So, but the NFL is just
when I was watching, they were taking everybody who was from Oregon. Yeah. I have no idea why. Okay. Well, thank you, Owen Brower. I'm going to read your paper. This is 4 years ago. I'll put it out on social, Twitter and LinkedIn. Owen Brower killing it at the University of Puget Sound. That sounds like a nice place to go. I think they filmed Shogun
Washington.
There. Yeah. It's good. Futures up 13. Dow futures up 61. Dan Ives coming up. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash on a day when futures point to a higher open on Wall Street. Earnings optimism pushing them higher. This is the start of the week that also includes a Fed meeting. Tesla shares, they are most active in the pre-market, 12% higher right now after getting in-principle approval from the Chinese government to deploy its driver assistance system in the world's biggest auto market. And with Japan enjoying a Golden Week holiday today, the yen weakened to over 160. It has since strengthened right now 156.38. And something to chew on this morning, according to data compiled by BestX Research, about a third of all S&P 500 stock trades now executed in just the final 10 minutes of every trading day. A Dow futures up 65 points right now. That's a rise of 0.2%. S&P E-mini futures up 13, and the Nasdaq futures 67 points higher. The 2-year yield 2 basis points lower. That's at 497. And the benchmark, the 10-year, that's 4 basis points lower. That's at 461. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is Bloomberg Business Flash.
John Tucker, do you use Siri on your phone? Wait, your phone is from 2000.
I don't even know what that is.
Paul, do you use Siri?
I do use Siri.
Do you?
Yes.
Well, like, give us an example.
I don't know.
Siri,
get me those directions for blank, blank, blank.
Directions for that. Yeah. I don't use Siri at all. Joining us now, Siri expert Dan Ives. He's with Wedbush. He's going to tell you that you're going to go long Apple. We all know the drill. Forget about it. Mark Gurman's changing the landscape now for Bloomberg, and he's really drawing in the AI chat with Cupertino. Dan Ives, Mark Gurman over the weekend says they have Google and OpenAI under discussion. How will Google and or OpenAI save Siri?
Look, I mean, this is all the drum roll in WWDC, where Cook's going to unveil AI coming to Cupertino. And I think Apple, look, they recognize they're in a massive position of strength. And I do believe Google is ultimately how they go down from a Gemini perspective. That's probably the path. But you're talking about billions of potential devices that they can tap into. This is the start of a new age for Cook and Cupertino.
Does it go into the service area, into the Apple store, where, what did I pay for Dune? $24.99 to rent Dune this weekend.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I put it on Dan's charge card, but that's fine. But,
Thanks. I saw that charge.
Thank you. But the incredibly lucrative store, does that get a big jump start in your Excel spreadsheet from AI?
I think that is what I view as kind of the hidden growth story that's going to happen here, because when we view as almost an AI app store coming to Apple, we think that could start to add 10, 12 billion per year as it starts to get up and running for 100 billion annually per year services that we believe is worth 1.5 trillion. And it goes back to that renaissance for Apple is now around the corner, despite obviously a negative near-term quarter in terms of China, where iPhone's been disappointing.
So, Dan, that's kind of where I wanted to go. You could argue the next 10 days are going to be really critical for Apple. They have their earnings this week, and then I guess their product meeting coming up in a matter of days. I look at the stock down 12% year to date. How much of that do you think is China, which I would call a fundamental near-term issue, and the whole AI? They just don't have the buzz in their multiple. How do you think about how they're going to try to address both of those over the next week or so?
Look, I think 95% of the reason the stock's down because of China, because that's the hearts and lungs of the Apple growth story. Now, when we look ahead, they'll have easier comms second half. And you have 230 million iPhones in China. 70% of them haven't upgraded in 3 to 4 years. So that upgrade's still going to be there. And I think the view that domestically they're done, Huawei and others, you make the best product in the world, consumers, whether it's China, New Jersey, or wherever else, they're going to buy those iPhones.
So you're confident in that. What do you look to market share issues? Because I believe the market share has actually started to weaken recently, whereas before they could say, hey, our market share's holding up. It's just the weaker Chinese overall economic market.
But that's like saying Brunson had one bad game. He's not going to be a Hall of Famer. So the point is, it's one data point in a longer term story where in that Mount Rushmore is Cook and Cupertino. And I think that will continue. That's why our view is betting against Apple here is the wrong move going into what we see as this renaissance of growth.
Dan Ives, Google with a share buyback. I'm looking at the fabulous FA screen here, and basically they've bought back $400 billion of shares in and after the pandemic, 2020, 2024 exclusive. Folks, it's just a rough number. It's a Monday morning. I'm eyeballing it. A number. Are they going to jumpstart a ginormous, like $100 billion or more program to buy back shares because of the cash build I see?
Unless they decide to buy a country, that's the route they're going to have to go.
What would they buy? Dan, seriously, what would they buy?
Look, from an M&A perspective, I believe it's all about AI. Just like we saw in Nadella, the poker move for the age of the open AI, we could see Alphabet soon are going down that path aggressively because this is a Game of Thrones going on. And now, no longer back against the wall, you're seeing Mojo returns that Google story.
Yeah. I mean, Paul, I'm looking at 5-year dividend growth, 5.6% per year.
Yeah.
That's totally unacceptable.
Well, yeah, you look at how fast our free cash flow's growing, maybe. Hey, Dan, how about, let's switch gears a little bit. Apple, some news over the weekend, Mr. Elon Musk making what I think some are reporting as a surprise trip to China. A, why did he go to China? And B, what did he accomplish?
It's a watershed moment for Tesla. Because Musk gets back on that plane from Beijing. They have FSD approval in China, first any domestic player. With the Baidu partnership, I view it as a game changer. This opens up that golden path for autonomous and full self-driving. They needed China. China needs Musk. I view it as just a historical moment for Tesla.
So give us kind of the overlay there about comparing Elon Musk versus Tim Cook, Tesla versus Apple, in terms of just kind of managing that relationship, both as a customer base and as a supply chain for Tesla and for Apple. It seems like Elon Musk is having a little bit more success there.
Look, I think both, they're 20% politicians, 80% CEOs, right? And I think Cook's been able to do that probably better than anyone in the world. But for Beijing needs Tesla. They also need Apple. It goes back to that balancing act. You could build a narrative. Oh, it's all about domestic players. In that trophy case, it's the best brands in the world. That's Apple, Tesla. They want that in China. That's why they gave Musk at FSD.
Right. So what's your favorite stock right now? I mean, Apple's basically beaten up. Tesla's beaten up. What's the Ives single best buy?
Oh, Microsoft. I think what Nadella is doing is that was a quarter along with Google. You hang it in the Louvre because this is just the start of the AI revolution being led by Godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA, and Nadella and Redmond.
Okay. I mean, I get AI for ChatGPT, for computer programmers, people like John Tucker. What does AI do for me? What's it going to do for me in the fact that I don't use Siri?
Yeah, so for legends like Keene, you won't see that till 2025 from a consumer perspective. The enterprise is where the AI revolution is happening today. But ultimately, Tom, I think the important thing is when Apple embraces AI, as Google embrace AI, that's where you're going to now start to see that to consumer from an app perspective, from a technology, and ultimately even from an AI perspective, things like FSD.
Dan Ives, thank you so much. First look here into Apple on Thursday with Dan. We can't get him the day earnings come out. I mean, he's so large. I mean, the day calendar is...
He's got to focus. He's got to focus. Get those research notes out.
He's got his social team's got him all booked up. We get him early. We get him before, with stocks going... What's it going to go, 170 to 200 this week?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, for Apple, you got earnings coming out this week. Earnings coming out this week. Then they've got their next week. They've got their product day, which is important.
Have you ever been?
I've not.
A stud like you?
No.
Have you ever?
No.
You gotta wear the right clothes to go to that.
You like Ed Ludlow. I mean, he's probably got a front row
I
seat.
mean, he's got the shoes with the white soles, and he puts a Tesla on autopilot. Ludlow's huge. We'll get Ed Ludlow on maybe on Thursday. Futures up 13. A good Monday morning to you. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash earnings and this week's Fed meeting on the minds of investors. And it looks like earnings are still doing the heavy lifting after the best week of this year for the stock market. Last week, we start the new trading week with futures higher. The next of the Magnificent Seven cohort report this week, we're going to get results from Amazon and Apple. A recent data on U.S. inflation of analysts expecting the Fed to keep rates on hold once again this week. The betting is maybe a quarter-point rate cut near the end of the year, and that's pretty much it. Main interest rate has been sitting at the highest level since 2001. Yen reaching a new 34-year low after the Bank of Japan decision to keep interest rates unchanged on Friday. It went through 160, but it has strengthened since then. Right now, 156.39. As for equities, Dow futures up 37 right now at 38,477. The S&P E-mini futures, they're up 11, and the Nasdaq futures 60 points higher. Most active Tesla shares, they are up 12.6% in the pre-market trading. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. On a Monday, and it is something when you have to come in and fill very large shoes. Hans-Gunter Redeker was iconic at Morgan Stanley. He was such a voice, particularly with all the turmoil of Europe and Brexit and all that. And to come in and try to fix and replace Hans-Gunter Redeker is a tough task. James Lord joins us now, head of foreign exchange and emerging market strategy at Morgan Stanley. You have an advantage, James Lord. You have Robbie Feldman in Tokyo. Dovetail your foreign exchange work with truly the #1 English-speaking expert on Japan, Dr. Feldman of MIT in Tokyo. Dovetail Robbie Feldman and you together on yen.
Well, I mean, you've just mentioned two of my heroes at Morgan Stanley, my former boss, Hans Redeker, who was all over the dollar-yen trade when Abenomics first started in 2013, and Robbie Feldman, who is just absolutely fantastic on all things Japan, obviously. I mean, I think what's happened really with the yen this morning is that it looks as though the Ministry of Finance has intervened. We don't know for sure. There's been no official confirmation of it. But given the volatility that we saw on Friday and the move in dollar yen this morning, I mean, it certainly seems like the market conditions that they would intervene in. And yeah, we've seen a reasonable retracement since then.
Right.
Well, I think the big question is whether it really works, right? I mean, there's very little evidence that FX intervention by official authorities, whether central banks or ministries of finance, actually works. You kind of need to have a lot of the fundamentals lining up for it to really change. I just think that really, in the case of dollar yen, the direction of it is going to be really more in the hands of Jay Powell rather than anyone in Japan.
Let me ask you just a general, unsophisticated question. I do best on those on Palm Monday. I'm really good at those. James Lord, if they spend out of their piggy bank to intervene, what is the cost? Is it a substantial cost to Japan to intervene or not?
Well, they have plenty of reserves that they can use to intervene in, and given that the kind of the fairly sporadic way and a relatively rare nature of these kind of interventions, I think dipping into their piggy bank every now and then for these sorts of events is not hugely costly in the overall context of their reserve position. But I guess like you have to sort of think about the benefit, right? Like what are they getting for the effort that they put in and the money that they spend doing it? And I'm not entirely sure that they get a huge amount. I mean, they can buy some time, right? The benefit is that they get some time where the market starts to stabilize temporarily, starts to reassess. Maybe people who are long dollar yen kind of just nurse their injuries for a little bit. But I don't think the benefit is really there for the long term.
Tip to tip on intervention. And I want to be careful here, folks. Bloomberg does not report that there was an intervention by institutions in Japan. Mr. Lord has made clear that's their interpretation at Morgan Stanley. I want to be very careful on that. Paul, the yen strength tip to tip on this right now is about 3.5%.
Okay,
that's the ginormous move. That's like a normal day in the, name the Polish zloty or whatever.
Exactly. James, why doesn't, just for those of us who don't follow this day to day, why wouldn't the central bank come out and say that what they did or did not do, number one? Number two, if they're out there buying yen, aren't they calling your trader at Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs saying, buy yen for me? Wouldn't you guys know? How does that all work?
Well, I think they would go mostly via the local banks. And by local banks, I mean not the representatives of foreign banks that are working in Japan. I think mostly that would be done by the Japanese banks. At least that's the kind of history and the market color that we get when these sorts of events happen. And eventually, they will confirm it. I mean, I think at the end of the month, at the end of May, they'll report the official intervention data that gets reported on a monthly basis, and in there we will see whether or not they've intervened. And I think maybe that kind of strategic ambiguity in the short term is helpful for them, because if they come out and say, actually, no, we didn't intervene now, then I think a lot of investors would see that as a green light to start buying some dollars again, and they clearly don't really want to do that. And if they confirmed it now, then it would just result in a lot more questions about how much, and is this going to be a new policy? And so I think for the time being, they'll just let the market keep guessing and just wait for that official confirmation to come out at the end of May.
All right, James. So if I look at the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, up about 4%, really off of that kind of late December mark here. If the dollar's that strong, who's on the other side of that train? What currencies are getting hurt the most?
Well, I mean, yen has been on the other side of it, clearly, for a lot of this year. And a lot of the low-yielding currencies really have been the ones that have suffered the most, right? I mean, we've been in an environment this year where, at least up until the end of Q1, we saw appetite for carry trades were very, very strong, right? And we include the dollar in that. I mean, as the highest yielding G10 currency, it was performing extremely well against everything else that was pretty much lower yielding than it. So Euros obviously suffered a bit this year. Cables started to come under a little bit of pressure. But then as we've started to see more and more evidence of this in reinflation in the United States, it has started to impact rates volatility, and it has started to impact FX volatility. And when that happens, carry trades come under pressure. So even the likes of Mexican peso, Brazilian real, they've started to weaken a little bit more meaningfully recently. So the dollar strength has really broadened out from what was just a low yield trade to something that's been a little bit broader.
Where are we on dollar strength? I haven't asked this question in ages, but on like trade-weighted broad, trade-weighted major, real trade-weighted dollar, I'll let you pick the series, but how richly priced is U.S. dollar right now?
Good.
Yeah, I mean, we're at kind of close to multi-decade highs, really, if you take the Fed's trade-weighted real dollar index on a real basis, we're pretty much at multi-decade highs. I mean, we haven't quite, I don't think, in real terms, gone back to the level that we saw around October 2022, which incidentally was the last time the Ministry of Finance in Japan intervened. Like, that was coming off of a long bear market for US Treasuries. Rate hikes have been priced in quite substantially, and we haven't quite got to that level on the broad dollar. I mean, this was when euro dollar was kind of trading closer to parity, right. And we had a lot more dollar strength. We haven't got back to those levels just yet. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that was the last, the Ministry of Finance intervention in 2022, in October 2022, did mark the peak of the dollar. I'm not sure it will be this time, because I think we really need to see U.S. inflation come down. But the parallel is there.
James, I'm running out of time. Let me squeeze this in. President Trump and his supporters over the weekend talk about managing the dollar. Can any given politician or government manage the dollar?
I think it's going to be really tough. I think it's really tough to do that. I mean, I think on the one hand, coordinated FX intervention can work. Obviously, the most famous example of that being the Plaza Accord. So, if the US were able to convince its many trading partners to cooperate, then that might work. But if it's just the US pushing for it itself, I'm not sure that it's going to be that effective, particularly if it's not, again, consistent with the outlook for the US economy. If you continuously get strong inflation prints, and clearly if you have a weaker dollar, the risk is that inflation just stays high in the US for longer, and the Fed just keeps hiking, then it will really blunt the impact of it.
Very informative. Don't be a stranger. I think he's nicer than Hans Redeker. Well, now, Hans was sort of always surly.
They're all nice.
James Lord, thank you so much, with Morgan Stanley. And, of course, our economic indicators, all this discussion of foreign exchange. It's brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com. to learn more. With your news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Saudi Arabia today. Blinken said China may not be directly providing weapons to Russia for its fight against Ukraine like Iran and North Korea. Blinken says, though, China is supporting the Russian invasion in another way.
What China is doing is providing invaluable support to Russia's defense industrial base that's helping Russia deal with the massive pressure that's been exerted through sanctions, through export controls, and other measures.
Meanwhile, Secretary Blinken says Israel must still do more to increase the flow of humanitarian aid into the besieged Gaza Strip. He said he would use his current Middle East trip, his seventh to the region since the Israel-Hamas war started in October, to press that case with Israeli leaders. At least 5 people are dead after tornadoes ripped through Oklahoma. State House Speaker Charles McCall said the destruction was extensive in Sulphur, a town of about 5,000 people.
The loss of life is the most precious thing, and that is what weighs so heavy on my heart. Everything else can be rebuilt, but we can't restore life.
More severe weather is possible, with the most concentrated threat for wind damage, large hail, and a few tornadoes in East Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Pedro Sanchez said he will continue as Spanish Prime Minister after retreating from public view for a few days in order to consider his future. Sanchez announced his decision in a televised statement from his official residence in Madrid. Last week, the 52-year-old premier said he was thinking about resigning after a judge opened a case alleging influence peddling against his wife. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Memory trip. You mentioned the district attorney of Rochester, New York, was doing 55 and a 35. Yeah. And, there's some serious stuff here about the way she treated a police officer and all that. Can I just tell you the single worst intersection in the 50 states is in Rochester, New York? And if this poor district attorney was doing a 55 where she should be doing 35 in the can of worms.
Yeah.
The can of worms was built in 1964. Yeah. In today's dollars, I'm sure it was $500 million to fix. And when you were a kid and you were driving at 16 or 17 learner's permit,
that's right,
your dad would take you up and put you through the can of worms.
The can of worms.
There's no equivalent in New York City.
That's a heck of a nickname.
It was the can of worms. Tourists would go through there, and it was the worst, absolute worst.
Oh, you're right. I'm looking at this thing. It is the local name for the intersection of Interstate 490, 590, the New York State Route 5. It's New York 96. Oh, my God.
And I understand there's some serious issues here about how she treated a police officer and all that. I don't, want to get into that. But if she was in the can of worms, speeding up to go across 5 lanes of traffic, which I have done a million times, I'm going to cut her some major slack.
Oh, man. His nickname there's a reason.
It makes a helix look like a walk in the park. Good morning to all of you driving, surviving. They fixed it, they say. The new can of worms, Rochester, New York. Futures up 14. Dow futures up 51. Really, really interesting day out there. And of course, getting ready for Apple on Thursday. Fed meeting on Wednesday.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Shares of Tesla powering ahead in pre-market trading. Right now, they are the most active, up 12.7%. And the earnings reports continue this week. Over 120 companies opening their books. They're going to include Apple as well as Amazon. Investors eager to see if they can confirm the tech-driven rally. And data compiled by Bloomberg Intelligence showing 81% of the S&P 500 firms have beaten first quarter profit estimates so far. Domino's Pizza, the same store sales there in the U.S. exceeding first quarter expectations ahead of analyst estimates. The company in the midst of a turnaround. Ann Arbor-based Domino's has been executing a series of growth initiatives that have included increased advertising and programs to boost operations. Right now, the Dow futures 55 points higher. That's up 0.1%. The S&P E-mini futures 14 points higher. The Nasdaq futures right now up 78 points. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
This is unfair. I mean, Lisa never depresses me. Tucker, I mean, Paul, Tesla's up 35% plus pre-market off the bottom.
Yep.
Of 4 cups of Sanka ago.
Well, I mean, it looks. I mean, Elon Musk, went to China.
Does he just say the stock's down? So what can we do to boost the stock? I mean, how does this work?
I don't know. I mean, the cult factor associated with Elon Musk in the stock is pretty darn high. So that key man risk, it's alive and well there. That's
out through 2 standard deviations. I mean, it's going to go round trip -2 to +3. I guess if you look at it, 189 right now on Tesla. It's been too long. Tina Fordham joins us right now with Fordham Global Foresight. She's got some incredible perspective on geopolitics. And Tina, I really want to focus on what I haven't focused on, which is to go narrow on Gaza. I saw a photograph over the weekend of the complete total Syria-like devastation of Gaza. What are they going to do down the strip in Rafah? And how does diplomacy fit in to a further devastation of Israel, of the geography?
Well, you've laid out just how complex and depressing the picture is. There's no other word for it. We are hearing that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is on the verge of issuing arrest warrants to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. There are talks going on with Mohammed bin Salman and other officials in Riyadh on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum meeting there. And I guess it was Friday that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, said that they were prepared to begin the offensive in Rafah unless Hamas returns the hostages and agrees to a peace deal.
Paul wants to get in here, but I got to ask a dumb question. If I'm in northern Gaza and they blow me out, I go down to middle Gaza. If I'm in middle Gaza and they blow me out, I go down to lower Gaza. Gaza's on the border with Egypt. If they blow people out of Rafah, where do they go?
Well, and this is why the talks are going on with the Egyptians right now, who have not accepted Palestinian refugees, right? And a corollary to this, which I think people forget, is that during the war in Syria, Turkey accepted large numbers of refugees from that war. A similar agreement has not been forthcoming with Egypt. They don't want to get stuck with a lot of refugees, and they have their own security concerns to be mindful of. But yes, there's nowhere for the refugees to go. There's nowhere for the people of Gaza to go, and Israelis are ramping up the pressure, and we have to wonder if what's going on the sidelines of these meetings in Riyadh is that the Gulf Arab states are doing exactly the same thing.
So, Tina, we're more than 6 months into this operation here by the Israelis. Unspeakable levels of destruction of Gaza. In hindsight, is there any indication that Hamas miscalculated here terribly in their October 7th attack?
Well, it's hard to see what they've gained apart from putting the Palestinians back on the agenda. Remember that, just 6 months ago, really, people were talking about this impending deal, normalization between Israel and Saudi and others that would have paved the way for a lot of regional economic integration. Gulf states still want that to happen, but a Palestinian state was not part of the discussion. And then, we've entered this kind of hellscape of the offensive in Gaza, the Houthi rebels, the recent exchange, kind of unprecedented exchange of missile fire. My question, to myself, is this the geopolitical bottom? Like, can it get worse? Or
Right.
is Hamas decided that it's going to accept Oslo kind of terms? That is kind of mind-blowing, but you really have to get to the bottom
Right.
before you can consider.
Tina, I think you're the most qualified person I know. Maybe Leslie Vinja, Maria Chatham House as well. But Tina Fordham, you are more qualified than anyone I know to talk about the college protests in America, wrapped over to 1968 and all the work I've done on that with Guy Sormont of Paris and others. Yeah. How do you treat the protests at elite schools in America within the filter that you have of diplomacy and the history of protest?
It is quite a spectacle. First of all, I'm a Columbia alum, and I'm on the advisory board for SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs, which is also caught up in these, although it's mainly the college. I don't think this is 1968, right? I think that this is identity politics in the United States that has now incorporated a foreign policy angle. I think it's incredibly difficult for the university administrations to balance their commitment to free speech and to the community that is a university with their Title VI obligations. They've got to protect students, and the whole spectacle seems to me, and I sit in London, where I have for a long time, to be a culmination of the culture wars, and in some ways the TikTokification of very complex issues.
So, Tina, I guess, again, we're 6 months into this. Is there any consensus with the people that you talk to that really have informed opinions and analysis of this situation? Is there a scenario where Israel can end this war in any reasonable time frame?
There are off-ramps available. There are definitely scenarios where Israel can end this war. What is less clear is whether Netanyahu can end the war, because his political future is so wrapped up in the continuation of the conflict. As soon as the conflict ends, he's no longer a wartime prime minister, and new elections will be called. He was unpopular before. Remember those massive protests in the cities, and the failure to bring the hostages home, and the failure indeed to protect Israel against the Hamas attack, has made him even less popular. So he doesn't want to face elections, and this is a very tactical, I think, response that we see now. I think Netanyahu is going day to day.
Tina, thank you. Brilliant. Tina Fordham, Fordham Global Insight. Thank you so much there on the narrowness of Gaza, no pun intended, and of course the tragedy unfolding at the southern end of Gaza on the Egyptian border. Our Jumana Bertecci at the World Economic Forum meetings in the Middle East, including conversation there with El-Sisi of Egypt. She's landed, she's parachuted into Dubai and starts off strong with the World Economic Forum meetings. We start strong with a lot of data, Paul, something we haven't even mentioned here. The resiliency of Brent crude at $88.77, uncomfortably near $90 a barrel.
Yeah, exactly, and that kind of goes to both the supply and the demand situation out there. And again, it's kind of found a little bit of a home here, right here, this high 80s level, which I think for certainly the producers, they're
you watch the Beatles movie, Get Back?
Oh yeah,
outstanding.
Sure.
Watch the movie of the Beatles. You could really see the tension there. Get Back, 1969-ish.
Go home. where you once belonged.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Bloomberg Surveillance. In the last hour, James Lord of Morgan Stanley. They don't have proof, but they would suggest intervention by Japanese institutions here in the market. Paul, I got to be careful there. It's not like it's news. It's not like it's fact, but they're looking at all the interior Morgan Stanley ability, and they're saying, if it walks like an intervention, it maybe is an intervention.
Right, and again, the Bank of Japan has not confirmed it. It's just kind of what we're hearing from market participants, but it did breach earlier, 160.17 on the Japanese yen now at 156.46.
For Global Wall Street, a little more foreign exchange here in the coming days. We're working to bring you some of the world experts as we can. Futures up 13. We're going to get a Bloomberg Business Flash in a moment. Bloomberg surveillance from the Interactive Broker Studios and brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers, they charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%. Rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. We're out on Apple CarPlay and Android Play. It's free. It's free. It's free. The Bloomberg Business app, you get wired up. Everyone's car has it except John Tucker's because, I don't have it in the Nash. Obviously I can't have it. It's, 1953. Leave me alone. But also out on YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. And I'm pleased to announce out there is the full repeat of the 3-hour program. It's out like at 10-ish or 11-ish.
Right out there, yep.
One of the interns puts it out.
It's called a pod.
And, we're gonna tell you about that in the coming days. But I'm pleased to announce
this?
you get to relive it with John Tucker. Speaking of that, with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Mr. Tucker.
And live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. Earnings optimism giving a lift to the futures right now. This comes after the best week for stocks in 2024 that we saw last week. Tesla receiving in-principle approval from the Chinese officials to deploy its driver assistance system in the world's biggest auto market. Tesla right now the most actively traded stock, up 13.5% in the pre-market. The developments come after Elon Musk made an unannounced trip to China on Sunday. And of course, a Fed policy meeting this week. The betting is we're going to get one rate cut, and that's going to happen later this year. Ahead of all this, Dow futures right now up 57 points, a rise of 0.2%. S&P E-mini futures, they're up 13 points. That's up 0.25%. NASDAQ futures right now up 77 points. Amazon.com, also among the most actively traded, up 1.5%. Apple shares, they report this week, they're up 2.6% right now, and Nvidia turning lower right now, down 0.2%. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John, thanks so much. Joining us now, Lori Calvasina, RBC Capital Markets. I called, I think 2 years ago, Lori, my theme was the Great Zombie Roll-Up. And part of the Great Zombie Roll-Up is money was free. It was a dire straits economy, money for nothing. Now I got a higher real rate. Does the higher real rate of 2.19%, 10-year real rate, inflation adjusted rate, now that slows down business, it slows down investment. Does that slow down M&As in your world of mid-caps and small caps?
All right, well, thanks for having me on, Tom. It's an interesting question. It's something that's been coming up with a lot of small cap portfolio managers recently, because one of the things I found is at the end of any given year, they will often tally up how many takeouts they had in their portfolios. And that's been a low number in recent years. So there's, kind of this fervor wondering, is the pipeline really that full? Are things going to pick up? I think interest rates are a headwind. That being said, a lot of companies, especially the big caps, are sitting on a lot of cash. To me, why I'm a little bit skeptical of this M&A, kind of explosion story is just that economic growth is picking up. And so when we're seeing these rapid increases in GDP forecasts, I sort of scratch my head a little bit and wonder, well, traditionally companies are going out and buying smaller companies to augment growth. And, kind of you buy growth when cyclical growth is lacking. Well, cyclical growth is getting more abundant. To me, that's the head scratching part of this, but we'll see what happens, because the investment banks certainly spent, the first week of reporting season telling us all the pipelines are full and corporate confidence is high.
All right, so let's take a look at earnings here. We're about 45% of the way through earnings in terms of the S&P 500. I'm looking at the Bloomberg terminal. Sales have surprised by about 1%, 1.5%, but earnings surprised up about 9% vis-a-vis forecasts. What have you taken away so far from this earnings reporting cycle?
So we like to look at the beat rate, just the percent of companies that are beating on earnings versus those beating on revenues. And both of those are north of 50% on the data we're tracking. But the percent beating on earnings is far higher than the percent beating on revenues. And we've seen that for a few quarters now. What it's telling me is that there's a continuation of this idea that, the macro, the underlying demand is fine. That's the revenue piece. The earnings piece is stronger. And I think that really speaks to the dedication of corporate America to defend margins, to meet earnings expectations. They they've been really doing a good job of keeping expectations low, and now they're coming in and beating them. So, I think that setup was, kind of established on purpose, and it is playing out.
We saw peak to trough here, just that little pullback. Thank you, Ken. We saw peak to trough, a little pullback there in the S&P 500 of only about 5%. Was that the drawdown people had been looking for or not? I mean, because now we've had a little bit of a stabilization in the market.
So it's a great question. We had a piece in our a chart in our weekly this morning that basically just shows how the decline in the equity market in the S&P 500, if you use that index since late March, has really mimicked the decline that we saw last summer and fall. It's kind of an eerie chart. I've seen versions of that floating around on the 10-year yield in the credit world. We took it to the equity side, and it would tell you that the pullback's not done. That pullback went a little bit worse than 10%. I'll tell you, though, what I'm really watching is the AAII sentiment gauge. We were only down, I think, to maybe -1 to 2% last week on net bull. So I think that's got farther to fall. That went to about 1 standard deviation below the long-term average last October when we saw the market bottom out. So 5% could be it. I don't think this is going to be any worse than 10%, but I feel like there's just more damage that needs to be done to sentiment before we can, kind of sound the all clear alarm.
So we have some more tech earnings this week, Amazon, Apple, some others. Is this still a tech-driven marketplace? Does it need to be a tech-driven marketplace, or maybe can other sectors kind of be the drivers here?
So I'm a little bit of a contrarian on this point. I think there's sort of a view out there that if tech isn't dominant, that's going to be the catalyst for downside in the market. And I don't necessarily view it that way. I think that could restrain some gains. I think that could, sort of cap some of the upside in here. But I do think that there's a catch-up trade that needs to happen in the rest of the market. If you look at the top 10 names in the S&P, recently they were trading around 27 times forward earnings. They're down to about 25 now. But the rest of the market outside of the top 10 has been trading around 16 times. So I think there's, an economic tailwind that we've got in place. There's some headwinds from the Fed, inflation and rates. But I do think there's just room for a lot of other parts of the market to catch up in here.
And now for the dumb surveillance question of the morning. It's a feature that we like to bring you. Lori, we understand that these big companies with mega free cash flow, margins that look like a Colombian drug cartel. Lori Calvasina, are there small cap stocks with accounting statements like Apple, Google, or Microsoft, where they just generate ginormous cash?
So, I think that there are probably some in there. If you talk to, your typical small cap portfolio manager, cash flow generation is a theme that they always go to, and they always manage to find some good ones. I don't know if there's anything that can really rival some of those big companies. Certainly, if you talk to Brad Erickson, one of our tech analysts over here, he likes to talk about the moats. And I think he has a good point. But I do think that safer areas of the market, whether you look at it from the cash flow perspective, the balance sheet perspective, you need all that stuff a little bit less when the economy is really humming along. And, what's really interesting to me about last week's GDP print is it was a weak headline number, but basically every economist on the street came out and said there's strength under the surface. So I think that hot economy thesis is still intact for now. You need these secular growers a little bit less, especially at these multiples.
Nice brief. Lori Calvasina, thank you so much with RBC Capital Markets. What'd you take away there, Paul? I mean, First
of all, she's really good. I mean,
she's
smart, communicates so well. I can understand what she's saying.
But, I was weaned on Dave Triple working for Phil Correa at Pioneer. There's a Pioneer fund.
Boston,
Wicked Blue Chip. John Kerry ran the Pioneer fund, and Pioneer 2 and Pioneer 3. It's like Dune. Do you think there'll be a Dune 3? I think so.
Could. You're giving Dune 2 the rave review. So
the value thing, it clicks in every 9 years.
Yeah, but for 15
what do you do for the other 8 years?
Yeah, it's tough to make money in value, although there are some people out there that do find the value, do find the catalyst. But man, it's a tough way to make a living, particularly, I would argue, since the 80s. I mean, it's just been a growth momentum. What do you call it, GARP, or whatever you want to call it. It's been a growth market.
Every half hour Barr gets in here later and later. He's on the phone with Detroit.
They're
talking to him about special teams.
Yep.
special teams coach.
Talking about first base coach.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Well, that was the Tigers, yeah. Futures up 11 with our news. In New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Riyadh, stepping up efforts to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in what may be a last-ditch effort to persuade Israel not to go into the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Here's Bloomberg's news director for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, Rosalind Matheson.
There's not a lot of goodwill on either side. The talks are still very fragile. They're now happening under extreme pressure, given the imperative to try and get some sort of deal to avoid that Rafah offensive. And the question is, what can the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken bring to the table in those conversations? It's unclear what else the US can do to lean on Israel to get to a deal.
Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson. Over the weekend, former President Donald Trump and his former challenger, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, met privately. This was a burying of the hatchet ever since DeSantis dropped out in January. This was the first meeting yesterday down in South Florida between the two men. Meanwhile, a new CBS poll shows the race is close in 3 key swing states. Trump narrowly leads in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania among likely voters, and President Joe Biden is just a couple of points ahead in Michigan. Florida workers held a protest march after a proposal to make outdoor work more tolerable in the state has been buried. The county's proposal had suggested mandated water and breaks in the shade for outdoor workers. However, it was preempted by a new law. Frustrated advocates for farm and construction workers say that as the summers get hotter, they'll need more protections, not fewer. Esteban Wood is a workers' rights advocate for Wee County and organized a protest in Homestead, Florida.
The state legislation prohibits counties and cities from implementing basic heat protections like water breaks, like rest breaks, like shade for workers who work outside.
The new law was signed earlier this month by Governor Ron DeSantis. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and John.
Our team working through the morning. We got Dan Ives on Apple here early on, and moments ago, in half an hour, we will have Ken Leon with us on Paramount.
Yep.
And I just think thank you, Eric, and all of our team for that effort. I mean, Ken's got such relative perspective.
Yep.
You know, like Michael Nathanson.
Yeah, it can be very helpful
really
to us. Because,
very
Tom, there was
helpful.
reporting over the weekend that the Bob Bakish, the CEO of Paramount, it may be forced out as
Oh, yeah,
soon
more
as
than
today.
May. Yeah.
And,
like-
I mean,
like-
when does that happen?
on
You
a
know,
commercial break.
Exactly.
So we can get ready.
I'm following the tape for that.
Am I wrong to say this is CBS and they renamed it to Paramount? I mean, what matters for
Yes.
our listeners?
It's CBS.
This is
Viacom.
CBS.
It's CBS. It's Viacom, the names you grew up on. And Paramount has always been part of that's the studio.
Yeah, to me, it's CBS.
Yep, I'm with you.
That's
I'm
the
with you.
emotion of it as well. Futures up 12, Dow futures up 49, the VIX 15.21. This is Bloomberg's surveillance.
24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The traders looking ahead to a busy week for company results. Next two members, the Magnificent Seven cohort, open their books. That's Apple and Amazon. Two fatal crashes involving Ford's Blue Cruise partially automated driving system, drawing the attention of U.S. auto safety regulators. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has now opened an investigation of the crashes, both involving Mustang Mach-E electric vehicles. Domino's Pizza shares gaining this morning. The restaurant chain reporting domestic comparable sales growth that beat the average analyst estimate. Paramount Global, you've been talking about that. Shares jumping this morning in the pre-market. The Redstone family and Skydance Media CEO both offering concessions to make possible change in control of the media company a little more appealing to investors. And as we look at the S&P futures right now, the E-mini futures up 12, that's up 0.2%. Dow futures 47 points higher. The NASDAQ futures right now, they are up 62 points. Two-year yield 4.98. I'm going to call that relatively unchanged right now. The 10-year down 2 basis points. That's at 4.64. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. And now we've been remiss. Paul's like me. We're like, yeah, okay, the Fed parlor game. They're going to cut this rate, do this rate. They're going to be 14 rate cuts the rest of the year. We'd rather talk about Orioles baseball. But right now we are going to talk about the Fed meeting. I'll be with Lisa and John. The Fed decides 2 p.m.ish, 1:30 p.m.ish on Wednesday. Matt Mishkin joins with John Hancock, Investment Management, out of Babson, co-chief investment strategist. And Matt, I'm going to say, you know, what John and I once got chastised by the ECB. It's a snooze fest. Is Wednesday a snooze fest?
I think Powell's got to come in and really actually shake it up. You put this into context. The last 6 months, they've been way too dovish, and they may have actually reaccelerated inflation just from the forward guidance that they provided 6 months ago. Powell doesn't come to the dovish side easily, the hawkish side. I think he's naturally a dove. He might have to come to the dark side a little bit and become a bit of a hawk here. And you might see a bit of a repricing in markets as a result.
Matt, when you go across and talk to your portfolio managers at John Hancock, do they believe inflation is back as an investment concern here? Or are they just saying, it's just a few months, don't worry about it?
They do. They actually think that it was misguided that the Fed was pricing, or the markets were pricing in so many cuts. But at the end of the day, the U.S. aggregate bond yield is near the highest yield you've gotten in 20 years. So it's 5.25, 5.28%. The highest in the last 20 years was 2006, 5.9%. So our bond managers are looking around being like, this is great. We can get some great high quality income. And if you can do about 6% over the next 5 to 7 years in a asset class that has low defaults, relatively low volatility, that could be the best risk adjusted return we get. And they're actually looking at this opportunistically here if yields keep backing up.
So where are you guys in your your equity fixed income allocations are weighting in today versus maybe your more recent averages?
Yeah, so we historically have been more overweight equities, and we are more neutral stocks, bonds right now. Within equities, we've been overweight U.S. versus non-U.S. That is paid off for us. We have been overweight the quality factor in the U.S. That has been also beneficial. Fixed income has been a little bit of a drag. We actually have trimmed our high yield. High yield spreads today are now under 3% again, 2.99%. Historically speaking, subsequent 12-month returns are low single digits at best. It's tough, in high yield right now, and we think it's priced for perfection. So we've got a little bit of underweight there, but we've got a mild credit bias. We love muni bonds. Talk about exciting bonds, right? Municipal bonds look good to us. Maybe that's a little sugarcoating it, but boring bonds look good to us right now.
I look, Matt, at what the Fed meeting is going to be. And if we had a seismic shift post-pandemic, we're on a basic model ISLM structure. We've been completely focused on monetary financial banking and now we've got to focus more on the real economy. Do you buy that theory?
I do. I mean, I just look back, the whole COVID shock and the Fed was buying high yield bonds. I mean, you start like thinking back to that and you're like, oh my God. And Powell, again, has been on the side of supporting markets. Even the regional bank issue, $300 billion off the balance sheet in a weekend. At a second there, you were like, are they going to come in? And then they come in with a bazooka. So I think they need to make that transition more so. I think they really do need to think about the real economy. They need to change their mindset from the low interest rate regime, the low inflation regime we've had. And it's been a learning process. But this Fed meeting, it's one they got to step up and get it done.
I don't know if I believe in this, but I know a lot of people do. Weekly data like claims. I take the 4-week moving average. Paul, we are nowhere near a labor economy that gives comfort to rate cuts.
No.
It's just a fact.
Yeah, and you wonder if this is kind of the new normal in the labor market, and to see how the immigration plays into it. So, Matt, I don't know, we're 45% of the way through earnings season here. Any takeaways, plus or minus? We're going to get a couple more big tech names this Thursday with Amazon and Apple, but what have you seen so far?
I mean, the tech and communication services stocks needed to get the job done, needed to deliver. There was already so much built in the price, and so far they have. I mean, we're looking at 30-40% earnings growth out of the technology and communication services sectors. The overall S&P 500 is tracking 2%. But that's, you think about that. If these companies weren't blowing out earnings, what would the overall market look like? But that's why this market's been concentrated. That's why we've had technology as an overweight, because the fundamentals have just been so strong to support these businesses.
Thank you so much. Matt Miskin with us, with John Hancock here, trying to get a look to Wednesday as well. I do like his idea that this is maybe an opportunity for a central bank leader, given such low regard, no dot plot, no this, no forecast, to really lay down the law on what they see. He's done that before.
Yeah,
There's precedent.
Historically, what they've been saying here very consistently is that they're data-driven, and the data shows a resurgence in inflation, which has been reflected, certainly in the bond market. I'm not so sure about in the equity markets. And just another little surveillance correction. Right. Amazon reports after the close tomorrow, and then Apple on Thursday.
We haven't talked about that. Just quickly here, as we're doing knitting here, David Faber over at the Death Star says Skydance has made final offer for Paramount. I don't know what that means. I mean, the stock's up at 6%. It's up $1. I mean, it's not even up $1. 1191 to 1247.
Yeah.
Center tendency.
Yeah. So, but this isn't the exit that Sherry Redstone ever envisioned for herself, her family. Well, this company, it was going to go out in a much, A, they weren't going to be sellers, but B, if they were, it was going to be a much bigger, grander, all-encompassing transaction.
30 years, 11 to 50, back down to 11, back down to 8, all the way up to near 70. It's been a crater from 70 down to 1191. What did Sumner Redstone do wrong?
Didn't sell the company when, we saw Rupert Murdoch sell his company when it became clear that technology was going to be the driver of value and not necessarily content.
But the heart of the matter is Mr. Murdoch looked at his driver's license and he looked at the birth date and made the grown-up decision for his family.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to do.
It is so hard to do. And, I think the question there is, all right, the Walt Disney Company's got the assets, great, and let's see what they can do. But really no one else in the traditional media space on a standalone basis has it. When if you believe that Amazon and Google and all those other folks and then Apple are going to continue to be bigger and bigger players in media, and that probably has to be the assumption. There's reporting out there that Amazon's going to bid for NBA games, and that would be a sea change in sports. 15
minutes, Ken Leon will join us here, usually on banks, but we'll get him with all of CFRA's expertise on media as well. Paul will certainly lead that discussion. Futures up 12, Dow futures up 48. The real yield, wow, 2.22%. That's a high inflation-adjusted yield. On Apple CarPlay and YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcasts, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And from the Interactive Brokers Studios, I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this opening bell report. And in about 10 seconds, oh, there we go, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange.
This is the first time you've done this.
I don't know. It's just like, get Elisa back. She'll be back tomorrow. After the best week for stocks this year, we're kicking off a new trading week with the major stock averages. They are pushing higher right now. Of course, it's also Fed week, but it's earnings that appear to be in the driver's seat with Apple and Amazon reporting this week. We have Apple shares right now. They are up 2.4%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average out of the gate, 84 points higher. That's up 0.2%. We're at 38,316. The S&P 500, 16 points higher. That's up 0.3%. 5117 on the index. And right now, the NASDAQ 100 is 80 points higher. That is up 0.5%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. And that is the opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much. We're fair and balanced. When somebody takes a shot at something, we got to get somebody in who not so much takes the other side, but can give us an informed opinion. That's always what Bloomberg Surveillance has been about. Early this morning, the hugely competent Mike Green really went after passive funds, as David Einhorn has done as well, just saying this is a problem waiting to happen. To get perspective, it would pay to speak to someone with 300 plus pages on John Bogle of Vanguard. This would be Eric Balchunas, author. He still works at Bloomberg. I mean, the movie rights that he sold his ETF book. It's incredible. Zendaya's in it. They're working out the movie right now.
Okay, good to know.
Passive funds. What would John Bogle say to the many, like Mike Green and David Einhorn, that say this is a problem waiting to happen because it's tucked away quiet money?
Yeah, he fought this all the time. He did take some of these seriously. He'd have meetings. One of the last meetings he had 6 months before he passed away was at Princeton to take some of the people who were writing articles from the academic world about passive. But largely speaking, he was like, there really isn't an issue, and don't make a big stink about it because we don't want some congressperson to make this a big issue for them and ruin what's a good thing, which is very low-cost investing. Investors keep most of their money. The two issues I have with Mike Green, and he's a great guy, we're friends, we debate all the time when we see each other and on Twitter, but one is, it's like, don't believe your lying eyes. Everybody knows that, like, look at Tesla. It goes up, it goes down. Like, passive isn't doing that. Active is controlling Tesla. Look at NVIDIA. NVIDIA was barely in the top 10 a couple of years ago. And why is it moved up in the passive funds? Because active loves it. So active is driving, passive is in the back seat. Until stocks stop moving, it fails the eye test. The other thing is nothing's really passive. S&P is market cap weighted large caps. So that's not even the whole market. And there's a committee that can pick things. The Russell 1000 is a different index with different rules. So really, the big thing about passive isn't that it's a passive or an index. It's that it's free. So really, and this is where another problem with Mike Green is, no one on earth is going to change their behavior. It's too good of a deal. So he has a lot working against them, but it's good to hear him out.
Okay, well, that was political. Mike Green, come back. Eric, okay, fine. So in passive, do I have an appropriate percentage of NVIDIA or Apple or Microsoft where I assume an active, I may not because they can't hold that much by perspective? If I buy passive, do I get the right amount of Apple?
Well, you get the market cap weighted amount of Apple.
They buy the market cap weight.
Yes. Yeah. Active will have more Apple or less. That's their active decision. This has been an existential crisis for a long time. Do you go overweight Apple, NVIDIA, and the Magnificent Seven? Or do you underweight them and go into more, let's call it fundamentally attractive stocks? Or do you just ride the wave? And this is something managers have struggled with. And there are times when going value works. And there are times when overweighting the Magnificent Seven works. It's sort of active's job to figure this out. And this idea that it's distorting the market, my thesis in the Bogle book is that distorted is also just kind of the natural state of the market. People thought the retail investors distorted the market. They thought the derivatives and the options distorted the market. Everybody thinks the Fed distorts the market. So there's all these distortions, and I think ultimately it's active's job to work around that, figure it out. But the problem with active is even if they do a good job, they have to overcome about a 2% fee between the expense ratio and their trading costs to get to zero. And the index fund is already eliminating both those charges. So that's the challenge, is that most active will outperform, like a lot of them will outperform on a gross level, but not a net.
Into the Sweeney dividend theory, which they're teaching at Princeton, Paul, you're basically you're using your dividend to pay the fee.
Yeah, I guess that's really in some cases. So as I think about the growth in asset flows into ETFs, it's just not going to the passive stuff. It's going to like this thematic ETFs, which seem to be gaining in share. So by definition, aren't thematics actively managed?
Yeah, to me, everything that deviates from a benchmark is active. So that would also put smart beta in active. So the Vanguard Growth Index Fund, to me, is active. It's barely active, and a lot of money goes there. That's 1.2 trillion. So if you look at the amount of money that's quoted in passive, about 25-30% is really stuff that differs from the benchmark. In other words, sort of in the ground between total active and like index funds.
Sort of kind of like
thematic,
killing me.
Smart beta, why not? They take an index and they're like, hey, let's tweak it. Let's weight it by dividends.
The kid we hired for Bloomberg Intelligence, they got fired at some firm because he wanted to do dumb beta.
Dumb beta.
Has anybody ever done dumb beta? Everybody, what the hell is smart beta?
Oh, yeah.
Where's dumb beta on the other side?
Somebody said, I got to remember this correctly. At a conference, this guy goes, if I buy an index fund and short beta, or if I buy a smart beta ETF and short beta, am I long smart?
Exactly. And what do you pay for it? All right, so if these actively managed, all right, I blame all my ETF knowledge on you because you're the only one I talk to on ETFs. When I first met you, it was all kind of mostly passive, index, QQQ, whatever, blah, 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 blah. It's all about the low cost because I don't have to pay for all this other stuff. But now if it's active, how do those guys be active and not have a higher cost level that they then pass along to me as an ETF owner?
It's going to be painful. There's many active funds now that operate under a 40 basis point fee. And a lot of like Vanguard's active are probably a good example. Vanguard has 1.3 trillion in active. And Bogle, in his books, was the proud father of these active funds. He would talk about the Wellington Fund or the Windsor Fund. And his thing is, I called it Bogle metrics, like sabermetrics. He wouldn't credit the manager. He'd be like, it's really me because I brought the fee down so low and I made them not trade and I used multiple managers, we sub-advised, that they started life on third base. So all they had to do is be a little bit good to outperform.
I live this, and it's incredibly true what Mr. Balchunas just said.
So, all right, where's the hot money, the sexy money? Where's that going?
Bitcoin
these
update.
days?
Come on.
Double leverage
update.
Bitcoin.
Hot sauce?
Yes.
Yeah, Greifeld just emailed in and said, Tom, you're Bitcoin free. Get over it.
So this rise of passive, this rise of cheap beta, and even some cheap smart beta, I think has created appetite for hot sauce. So I do think, even though this sort of Bogle effect is taking over, ironically, it has caused an appetite for this. So thematics, Bitcoin, I think there's a market for this stuff. Even single stock ETFs, your trading account, just a place to speculate. So Bitcoin having a rough couple weeks, to be honest. The flows are about flat. And the price is flat. So I think we're taking a breather here. But we ended at about 12 billion in the first 3.5 months, which is an enormous amount for new ETFs.
For spot Bitcoin ETFs?
Yes, net flows too. That's net of GBTC.
Did the fancy people sell into the strength to 70,000?
If I had to look at dollar weighted, it's still probably up, but it came down a little bit because it's down to 62,000. So yeah, some people bought at that 70. But again, I think ETF retail holders and advisors are stronger hands than people think, because again, this is a small allocation. This is not their whole thing. So they're already covered. They got the serious stuff covered already. This is just for fun. They can handle some drawdowns.
We live vicariously through you. Where's your next junket?
I was just going to ask.
I'm actually going to Europe in about 6 weeks. Holy tour, Amsterdam,
Biarritz, Nice,
Germany, and London. We're having a big event on July 12th with my team.
Are ETFs big in Europe?
Yeah, they're getting big. They're about, 1.2 trillion. Asia and Europe about tied. U.S. about 3 times bigger than both.
Eric Balchunas, thank you so much. Driving the nation's wisdom.
I don't know if Europe's ready for him, Tom.
They're not. He's just going to the Olympics. Don't kid yourself. Exactly. Eric, thank you. You got to get up, Eric. Lord Barr has to get in.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna bring Lord Barr over here to do the news.
Yeah, he's going to go into Frankfurt.
No, we'll bring him over. You know,
ETFs. It's going to get ugly.
It's been enough of an ugly day with John Tucker in for Lisa. We need to get Barr at the desk here. Get his hands.
By the way, I'm filling in for Michael Barr tomorrow.
Oh, are you?
How come nobody fills in for you, John? You're always here.
Can you really fill in for me? Think about it.
I could just see the two of you parking your cars on top of each other
trying to
during the
save.
congestion tax coming up. Dow up 112 big points, 38,300. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and John. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today begins his 7th diplomatic mission to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas war began more than 6 months ago. While in Saudi Arabia, the secretary discusses his plan for greater security and peace for the people of Yemen. Meanwhile, protests continue across college campuses as students and others spar over Israel's military offensive in Gaza and its mounting death toll. Many campuses were largely quiet over the weekend, although a few colleges saw forced removals and arrests. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby weighing in on the rising college campus protests that concern the Israel-Hamas war.
We absolutely condemn the anti-Semitism language that we've heard of late, and we certainly condemn all the hate speech and the threats of violence out there. These protests, we understand they're important, but they do need to be peaceful.
Kirby spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Thousands of former Twitter employees say they are still owed severance pay. Today, the first depositions get underway, starting with ex-owner Elon Musk. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview.
This will be the first arbitration hearings involving those employees who say they were cheated out of severance when Elon Musk bought Twitter in October of 2022. An email from the law firm representing almost 2,000 former Twitter employees, plus more than a dozen class action lawsuits, says the deposition will be in person and last for 7 hours. The company, formerly known as Twitter, which Musk has since renamed X, has been accused in multiple suits of numerous labor and workplace violations. A spokesman for X has declined to comment. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Pedro Sanchez says that he will continue as Spanish prime minister. It was just last week the 52-year-old premier said he would withdraw from the public eye to consider his future after a judge opened a case alleging influence peddling against his wife. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
I haven't done a basketball update today. The Knicks, this is exciting. We talked about New York as well, but just specifically, they're ahead 3-1, right?
Yes, against the 76ers.
And they come back to the Garden, right?
That's right.
Nice.
The Garden is rocking.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you
Between them and
imagine
the Rangers,
working there? The people that actually work this refurbished and beautiful arena after the refurbish.
Yeah.
It's just their heads must be spinning on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. It's good. More is better for them. I mean, they want to work as many games as possible.
We'll have to get Mario Gabelli, get Chris Morengi in here to talk about it. You know?
There's a lot to talk about with those two.
There is. Dow gives way a little bit, up 111 now, up 89. Sweet 15.23. Paul, to a record high in SPX is about 2.5%.
Yeah, exactly. Tom,
We've lost our bearings on that.
I'm just looking at Tesla. I was asking myself, is this trip that he made to China, is it really worth it? Is it that important? Well, boy, the stock's up 12%, so I guess the answer is yes. I don't know.
Whatever you think about Mr. Musk, in my opinion, doesn't matter. Boy, can he manage the zeitgeist like nobody.
Yep.
Incomplete. Change around there as well. Let's do some obscure things as well. Dollar fractional weakness right near 106 on DXY. Yen was a 160 overnight when Michael Barr was waking up. 156.57. Morgan Stanley saying to us they don't know if it was an intervention, but they would guess. They sort of kind of like smell intervention here. We'll see in the coming hours on that. Euro 106.92. From New York City, Bloomberg surveillance.
Now.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. Tesla, right now, the most active. Those shares up 12%. Elon Musk's quick visit to China paid immediate dividends. Tesla receiving in-principle approval from the Chinese government to deploy its driver assistance program. You have shares of Amazon and Apple also on the most active list. Amazon shares, they are up right now less than 0.1%. Apple shares are up 3.8% at this point. And after the best week for stocks in 2024, the major averagers higher right now. Of course, it's Fed week, although no changes to policy are expected. We have S&P 500 right now 9 points higher. That's up 0.2% at 5108. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 103 points. That's up 0.3%. And the Nasdaq 100 is 9 points higher. We check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio, I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
John Tucker, thanks so much. We're going to get to Ken Leon here in the entertainment known as Paramount. But first, entertainment. We speak to our White House Correspondents' Dinner reporter, John Farrow. Did you write the jokes for the president?
Okay, pause. You know when you walk into a room and you're like, no, do not even want to be in a hot mic right now.
I was turned it on. I was looking for you. I didn't go this year, folks. And John, I turned it off after the third Biden joke. It was just flat this year.
At the risk of getting into trouble. Okay, let's talk about the comedian and not the president. That's maybe better ground to go
Mr. Jost,
on. Okay. If you order vanilla ice cream and get vanilla, should you complain about it?
Right.
Like, the guy's a likable guy. The jokes are kind of okay. It's a bit of family fun. You move on. I thought that the bit at the end was a bit inappropriate to basically endorse the president at the end of what is meant to be a grilling. It's a little bit odd. It's not really what it's meant to be about.
I have said for years, just bring back Sinbad. The best I ever heard was Sinbad. Condoleezza Rice is in the front row.
Right.
And he did it, he tore it to shreds with all of her gifts, gracefully, wonderfully as well. Quickly, Miami, Formula One, I think it's this weekend.
Looking forward to it, but I'm not done with Saturday. I think we've moved on too quickly.
Okay. Who's running the show?
Is there anything more establishment than SNL at this point in the world of comedy? Yeah. And if you want someone to truly do the sort of like anti-establishment thing, Shane Gillis, everybody, Shane Gillis. And they brought him back to SNL for a little bit of a skit, but I think he'd be amazing to do a White House.
One more question. We're going to get to Ken Leon.
Okay, sure.
I mean, you're teeing up Eddie Izzard.
I'm sorry, Ken.
Eddie Izzard?
Eddie, yeah.
Should he be doing it?
I don't know.
Bring the Brits?
You should ask Eddie.
Okay. John Farrow,
I can do it for you next time, TK.
Our surveillance correspondent.
I've got no idea why I'm here, John.
Did you get your food at 10 or 11?
You know how it works, TK? They bring out that terrible dish that's got like fish on one side and this like hard red meat on the other.
There you go.
Tom said to me years and years ago, cheat guide White House Correspondents' Dinner, he said, John, we're going for a burger together. And I was like, what do you mean we've got dinner? He's like, yeah, we're going for a burger together and then we're going for dinner.
Pro tip, eat before you go. John Farrow, thank you so much. And of course, the Fed meeting here on Wednesday. It's going to be interesting. John and I agree it's a snooze fest. We won't go there. Never a snooze fest with Ken Leon, of course, head of research, CFRA. Paul, why don't you bring in Ken here on the Backish watch?
Ken, I mean, we're on the Paramount watch. We're on the Mr. Backish watch, the CEO of Paramount. We're on the Sherry Redstone, the control shareholder watch here. How are you thinking about it, Ken, about what is happening in front of our eyes at Paramount? Will there be a change of control here?
There probably will be a change of control. Our North Star is the underlying assets of Paramount are worth far more than where the stock is trading. And of course, this becomes a TV episode, mostly because for Paramount shareholders, we want something to happen at their level, not just for the controlling shareholder, Sherry Redstone, at National Amusement, which owns 77% of the stock.
77% of the votes is the key issue, I think, or a big portion of the super voting stocks. And Ken, how do you affect that? How do you give a value for the voting shares that are owned by Sherry Redstone and National Amusement, and at the same time treat non-insider shareholders equally or equitably? How does that actually happen?
No, it's a good question. And by rights, certainly she can move, she can affect something with Skydance and leave public shareholders really on the side. But there's independent board of directors at Paramount that have, you know, a fiduciary to try to get something that's fair.
Yep.
Right.
The episode really with Bob Bakosh, CEO, change of control, he just gets paid out handsomely. But again, these are great assets for someone to own.
Okay, they're great assets. You know, I know you've been on the phone with Mario Gabelli all morning. For people like Mr. Gabelli that have owned this thing forever, looking at those great assets, what is a fair share price exit for Ken Leon?
We have, just for the public share price, not for a private buyout, a $16 target price. Apollo, which I cover, has put a much higher bid. And of course, the dynamics here are is how serious can it be, or, you know, with additional financing, Sony has been talked about.
I mean, I look, Paul, right now at 1260, there's $4 up. My math is it's a 30% lift to Ken Leon's price, you know, somewhat of a fair exit price.
Exactly. And Ken, you mentioned private equity interest here. I'm surprised we haven't seen more private equity interest here. Why do you think that is? Is it because this company already has a lot of debt on their balance sheet and there's not much more that can be added? Why do you think there hasn't been more interest?
The world has changed, and the value of assets, whether it was Paramount with Showtime, pay TV, or even their broadcast CBS, is worth less today than before.
Yep.
But the film libraries and the sports rights that they have are valuable, incredibly valued to, you know, Paramount is really a shadow of itself. It's a small company compared to what we have with Netflix or Disney. But why wouldn't an Amazon come in here and pluck this off? It would really fit in with their previous acquisition in media with MGM and getting Thursday Night Football. So I think for the giants of social media that are taking over broadcasting, there's opportunities here.
Ken Leon to Banks, where you help us each and every 90 days. We're into the summer where bankers panic because they want to get out front of October planning for the February bonus season. Are we steeled here for legitimate and substantial terminations at the major New York banks?
Well, well, first of all, I think we're in the early innings of a recovery for investment banking, both M&A and equity underwriting. We saw a little bit of that in the first quarter results. And as we look ahead with the underpinnings of a strong U.S. economy, high CEO confidence, and really rates that are manageable. They're not going to zero, but you can do business and get valuations between buyers and sellers. I think we're going to have a terrific year for investment banking.
Ken, how about the corporate banking side of the business? I'm thinking about the J.P. Morgans, the Bank of Americas, the Wells Fargo. Did corporate America, do they need bank debt at this point?
They're diversified. And, you know, I think when you look at their business of large corporate, middle market companies or small business and personal, it's very healthy, and we have no red alerts in terms of credit risk. So again, when you look at these banks, they've actually performed well to the S&P 500, and we think there's durable recurring fee income that they're getting, including credit cards. So the businesses look very good to me, and I don't believe that there's a lot of credit risk. We're seeing it much further downstream of the smaller banks for commercial real estate.
Ken, thank you. On Paramount, on Banks, gifted Ken Leon, thank you so much with CFRA. We also thank John Farrell for an appearance here, our surveillance correspondent and our correspondent.
That really added to the program.
It did. It was a value add.
So do we have a whole posse down there at Bloomberg Television?
We have a posse there,
good,
led by Margaret in our Washington office.
Okay, good.
And I've had some huge constructive memories there, not including the food. The food is the
Where's
worst.
it held?
The Hill.
Oh, the Hill. Okay, there you go.
1969 was our feature today. Thank you, Three Dog Night, for an appearance. The Beatles for an appearance. John Fogerty crushing it with Creedence.